Good everything. Hi. Hi, Dr. Carr.
Hey, what's going on, Professor Hunter?
What's up, Nubians? What's up,
Nubians,
other
what's
people?
going on? Rest of the world, we get them coins up. Y'all coming over, but until you do, get to see the world in
Yes,
the world.
yes. How art thou? How are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm a little salty. These white nationalists in Tennessee have decided that they've been squeezing Tennessee State for a long time, and so they were able to get rid of the Tennessee State board, claiming there was some financial not mismanagement, but that the books didn't add up. It's a lie. Jason Monpower, who's the state of Tennessee comptroller, is straight out of Donald Trump's central casting. He's a MAGA clown and intellectually and culturally inbred piece of work. And that's the one that tried to take over Mason, Tennessee, and West Tennessee when they put in the Carr fat. The same white boy, and the white boy governor Lee. So anyway, long story short, they were able to force out the president, Brenda Glover, Dr. Glover,
Of your alma mater.
the
Of
sister who is.
Oprah Winfrey's alma mater.
Well, see, and this is where I'm going with it because Oprah. I'm sure she listens to you every once in a while.
I doubt that.
I don't know. You do well. You're constantly surprised by who does, and I wouldn't be surprised if she's not one. But yeah, and Dr. Glover is heading up the kind of pan-Hellenic effort for Kamala Harris because she was bachelor's of AKA before. Anyway, and a CPA, by the way, in addition to having a doctorate. So ain't nobody messed up the books. The white boys been after Tennessee State trying to take it over for 50 years, and now they got a little MAGA crew in there think they can do it. They replaced that president with an interim president who I'm not getting good reports back on. Brother, get your mind right. I'm not even going to name your name. If y'all want to know his name, look him up. But at any rate, Tennessee State is playing Howard for homecoming. It's a home and home. They're coming to DC this year in a couple of weeks, and then Howard is going down there. I don't have divided loyalties. I work at Howard, been worked there for 24 years, but the blue and white I wear is Tennessee State. Please understand. So at any rate, I'm going to, and they bring in their band until these white boys are saying that the budget is tight, and so they had to make some financial decisions. Tennessee State is not bringing the aristocratic bands to Washington D.C. and another game because they say they had to make some budget cuts. You MAGA bastards can go to hell. And so I'm thinking, well,
This is
Oprah,
the band that you performed in. This is a band that you.
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. The only reason I went to Tennessee State, then I got there and realized, okay, that's a good reason to come, but then the reason to stay is the rest of your life. So, but at any rate, so they said it would take $150,000 for them to come to DC and to come because Tennessee State got 300 people in their band, 250, well, tight 250 if you don't expand, and this other place in Missouri, some white school because they were in a white conference that they were forced into during the other iteration when they tried to take them over. Anyway, long story short. $150,000. They say they can't justify spending it. And so I'm thinking, well, Oprah could write a check, but that ain't even it. Oprah could just say, let's raise $150,000. It's enough for us alum to put that money together in 24, 48 hours. But, the American Negro doesn't necessarily think that way. So we'll see. I doubt that the band is coming. So, to you MAGA bastards, let's be very clear. You were born in darkness and you will die in darkness. Politically, your death is coming very soon, and that right soon. So you keep doing what you're doing. We're gonna keep doing what we're doing. We're gonna see who wins. You read a little world history, you find out you're not gonna make it. You
in the name of Jesus, touch and agree.
Touch in the name of Jesus. Except unlike Jesus, nobody getting crucified. My power. Nobody's getting crucified, and they won't have to be waiting on a resurrection. That's gonna happen in the living now, baby. Read your funky history if you can spell with your letters. I doubt that you can. You certainly can't count. Jason Mumpower. MAGA. Anyway, that's how I'm doing. How you doing? How you doing?
So much. There's so much happening.
I loved your commentary on the message on Brother Coates.
Yeah, I bought the physical book.
I heard you say you couldn't take it. You had to turn it off, huh? You wanted once you got past Baltimore.
And I get, and it's a different discipline, listening versus reading. It's a different soul game. Reading turns on your own imagination and is more expansive. Reading allows you to digest more of the content, but we're conditioned to watch and to listen. And I think that might be by design too, because I feel like we're losing our imagination and we're losing certain parts of what we need to imagine a world that we need to live in, or imagine a world that we can create. Because reading on the page And those of you who have, vision issues, I understand why you need to listen. But if you can read, it opens up so many different things. And so I'm like, I can't wait for the book to come, because as I'm listening, I'm pausing so I can take my own, self out of the way and just kind of sit with the words. But I say I want to see those words on the page, because he's a craftsman. It's very, very good at putting words together and evoking a feeling, even right down to talking about his daddy and the inscription on a piece that his mom sketched out of his father reading.
Yeah.
We both know Paul Coates, so that made me smile.
Yeah,
And
you can see
and
him
oh
with
my
his
goodness,
legs crossed in
yeah,
there too. That's what he doing. He probably
yeah,
somewhere doing it right now.
yeah.
If he's not listening to us, which blows my mind that he can find the time to listen to us every week.
Love that man.
Mhm.
And then talking about his name and how it's not
Yeah.
pronounced the way it's spelled, and how his parents did that on purpose, but it also forced him into conversations with people about it, which was not his comfort zone, to actually have to correct people and then have a conversation about an ancient name. I'm like,
Yeah.
the purpose with which Ta-Nehisi was forged. I just, everybody that's raising children right now, take note of that.
Mhm.
Take note of the purpose, right down to the name and the spelling. And I just,
Which is interesting, because as folks here in Nubian know, if you spent any time with that debating in the Meta class, Meta is not a spoken language. If you're looking for the closest cognate, the closest kind of extension of Meta, it will be in Coptic, which is Greek letters, but the language is Egyptian or Nile Valley. So you would have to look maybe for some connections to Amharic. You had to go to Ethiopia to look for the way things will be sounded. But as anyone who studies Meta knows, we don't know how those words were sounded. All we can be sure about are the consonants, the uniliterals, the biliterals, and triliterals, 1, 2, or 3 consonants. So in order to sound them out for purposes of discussion and translation, you stick the vowels between the consonants. So Nahasi, as he would say it, is spelled with an I, because typically it is pronounced Nahisi. So people are not being incorrect. In fact, Egyptologists would make the mistake, oh, Ta-Nehisi. And he would say, no, Nahasi. And he said, no, it's not T. But A or I, neither one, it's arbitrary. It could be To-Nehisi. It could be because it literally means, and Nehesi is a word. Mario wrote a whole paper on it and went to Rhodes, Greece, to beat up this white, intellectually, this white Egyptologist, Donald Redford, who translates Nehisi as wretched, because that is because there was, I won't say it was beef, you can say beef in the contemporary, between who we would call the Egyptians and who we would call the Nubians, but they are kin. Culturally, biologically, they all in the Nile Valley. So in moments of tension and even open war, the Egyptians might refer to the Nubians, Nebu is the name, or Taseti, land of the bow, as Nehesi. Nehesi, Redford translates as wretched, but Mario translates it differently and went there to confront him to say, it's like a member of your family who's trifling. And you might call them a name, but it's not an epithet meant to mean enemy. You're a Quebec. So I'm saying all that to say Ta-Nehisi or Ta-Nehisi or Ta-Nehisi, none of them are incorrect. And Nahasi or Nehisi refers to the land where the Nebu people were, black, and some people would call it land of the blacks, but the word for black, Kim, mostly in ancient Egyptian, technically not their word. The provenance of his name, though, when you talk to Paul, comes from that generation of scholars, none of whom are mentioned in this book, by the way. Yosef ben Yachanan, John Henry Clark, who would use that word to refer to black people. So it's very interesting, particularly when Ta-Nehisi kind of ends that vignette by saying he's never quite bought into. And I'm thinking, as brilliant as your wordsmith is, as deep as your mind is, this is your call to do some more studying. Because he went all the way to Senegal. And at the end of that chapter on Senegal, the question he is asked, which he doesn't remember, from the young student, the sister who's working on his book, she's at Sheikh Anta Diop University. And that's the first mention you make of Sheikh Anta Diop. And you in Senegal. You talk about style the whole time, but didn't pass by Popengine to see Ayikwe Arma, who is making these things. So I'm saying the more you know, the more you can see. This is a very, very sincere, very brilliant, very deliberate and committed, and at the same time, very clear demonstration of exactly the thing that you say we got to battle. There's amnesia in this chapter, and by somebody who is one of the most accomplished people in the generation in terms of the word. Smith. So it's very interesting.
And as I continue to read, listen, the baked in self-hatred that has been inculcated. No, I'm saying that we all possess.
I heard you say that. I heard you say that.
Yes. I was like, yeah, me too. The other Me Too movement we need to acknowledge that baked in self-hatred, which will prevent all of us from getting over the finish line to freedom, has to be addressed. But it was on full display, and I was sitting there, and I'm glad he acknowledged it, but I'm like, how many of us are not acknowledging it? And we convene every Saturday, and it's getting better and better and better as people get more and more engaged with the reality that we have been conditioned to hate ourselves for the purpose of, subjugation. We have to hate ourselves to allow the things that happen in this world, right? And not speak up about it. And not just for selfish reasons that it can happen to us, but because it's wrong.
That's right.
Because it's wrong. And we know right and wrong. There's no gray area to this. And that's the other,
it is not. It is. Let me
gray area.
I want to ask you, as somebody who, has been a journalist for a long time, who's taught journalism, and who also practiced among many other areas in the area of sports. Do you have any thoughts about Peter Edward Rose? About Pete Rose?
Yeah, he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Why you say that?
Because he bet on baseball, not as a player. And even if he did, I'm gonna say less about it. They want.
No, you should say no, because when you say that, I mean, gray area and right and wrong, I am completely with you. No one will ever break that record.
Period.
He has more hits than any human who will ever hold a piece of bat in professional baseball. Japan, United States. He's in the Hall of Fame, or the Hall of Fame's a sham. He didn't inject drugs in his arm. He didn't, He did
wasn't on steroids.
Wasn't on steroids. In fact, wasn't that talented. Just outworked everybody.
He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Period. Come on. But even, you're right. The Hall of Fame probably shouldn't exist. No, all of these manufactured ways in which we celebrate people, right? Because it didn't include the Black players until very recently, and they were the best to ever pick up a bat and ball. We can't even talk about any ice hockey, country music, like all of these manufactured awards for people to pat themselves on the back for things that couldn't have existed without the people before, but we don't ever acknowledge the people before. It makes all of it a sham, but if you're going to have it, Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame.
If you're going to have it.
And someone said, if it's a lifetime ban, he's dead now, put him in.
But then does it matter?
No, I don't know.
I mean, it's just like in the last chapter, which of course, as we know, is half of the book, the message, when Ta-Nehisi is going through those checkpoints. And they keep asking, what's his religion? He said, I don't have one. Well, what about your parents? They don't have one. What about your grandparents? Well, they were Christians. Okay, you can pass. People may miss that. Ta-Nehisi is a self-proclaimed atheist.
Yes.
And so, I'm saying that to say that, if you're going to have a story, I mean, one of the elements of the spine of this book is the power of myth making. And ultimately, in fact, the arbitrariness of myth making. It's all a story. So, I mean, at what point Pete Rose it's very interesting, isn't it? He wasn't working class. He was poor on the west side of Cincinnati. But when you look at the 1970s, when you see those national, Major League champions, 1976, 76 Reds, one of the reasons I, as an 11-year-old, rooted for the Reds was all those Black players.
Yes.
Dave Concepcion, Cesar Geronimo in center field, Afro-Latino, Venezuela for Dave Concepcion, Tony Perez, Cuba, Afro-Cuban, Dan Dreesen, Ken Griffey Jr.'s father, Ken Sr., all those guys, they're all Black. Pedro Bourbon, I mean, they were Black. And Pete Rose, for lack of a better term, the white trash, you know what I'm saying, who will be called white trash by white people, who identified with him as a white hope, was very close to all those players until literally the day before he died. They were in Nashville at an autograph shop, and you see Pete Rose in a wheelchair behind him, Tony Perez, George Foster, Ken Griffey sing. These are Dave Concepcion. All of them. The only white boy in that picture is Pete Rose. And you know what I'm saying? Now here y'all want to be on your high horse about a Hall of Fame, and at a time when black players were not accepted. This guy breaks into major leagues, and he not only doesn't turn away, he doesn't turn away from the black players, he turns to the black player. And y'all gonna hang this on him, you racist.
Wait,
You know what I'm
but the nerve to accuse somebody of cheating.
Exactly.
The whole country's built on cheating and stealing. What are we talking about? This is what I'm saying. The hypocrisy. I mean, there are no gray areas, and there shouldn't be. Like, we should be very clear about it and tell the truth about it. And I know it's uncomfortable. I said this week too. You know, the truth can be uncomfortable, can be even downright painful, but it's the thing that will nourish you.
That's right.
It will set you free, and I do believe that if you can digest it.
What is the truth, though? I mean, this is if we can digest it. Yeah, I mean, Ta-Nehisi has done a hell of a job in this short book to raise things, and again, raise the question of whether or not we can see them first, and then if we see them, will we acknowledge them? And then if we acknowledge them, will we act on them? Because to me, of the four movements in this book, it's not the longest chapter in the book, the one on Palestine. It's the ones that you were talking about. It's that chapter.
So why do they focus? Because if you were to watch all of the interviews, you would think this book was about the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Because it is. Well, it's not about the Palestinians. It's about power. And those in power don't like to be confronted. So Palestine and Israel, in some ways, sadly, is a metaphor. And it's interesting because there's nothing Ta-Nehisi could have done to inoculate himself, including when you look at that last chapter, that long chapter, including beginning with an appreciable amount of that chapter, the gigantic dream, chapter 4, with the Holocaust, the murder of human beings by other group of human beings in Germany, overwhelmingly Jews, but also Roma, which we call the gypsies, unfortunately, the derogatory. Also some blacks got caught up. Ernest Just, the famous Spingarn Award-winning biologist, cell biologist, himself caught up in a concentration camp before he was able to get out of the country. That's Ernest Just, the same Ernest Just who was on faculty at Howard for years, whose name is on the biology building. He got caught up in the Nazi fervor. But the 6 million in that role that Coates visits when he goes to the Holocaust Museum, International Holocaust Museum, you know, those people were killed in Europe. And he starts that chapter with that. But I don't recall, and I haven't watched all of them. We all seen the CBS one. But, you know, Jon Stewart, and if you're Joy Reid, I'm like, yeah, it's like you only wrote one chapter in the book. And in that chapter, you don't even start with the thing. You go right to the thing that you are defending, that is indefensible. This is about power. So what if and when, and we will get at some point be in conversation with our brother. Right now, he's white hot, which means, you know, you got to talk to white people first. And
can I
go ahead. But when we talk to him, yeah, go ahead, jump in, please.
That bothers me.
Let's talk.
You were forged in blackness.
Yeah, no question.
Okay. And in many ways, when you go sit there, you validate or you tell the world that their platforms are more important to you or thereby to us than our platforms. And I'm not talking as somebody that has a platform because, you know, as I've said, you know, many times, people, you know, usually don't want to come to sit with me because I'm going to ask questions. So I get that. I understand that. And I may blow up their spot. And I may, you know, put them in a situation that makes them, you know, and then how dare I or whatever. So, you know, I get the tippy paws of people coming in to sit with me. And it doesn't matter. I'm going to talk about you anyway.
No question. Which I don't even think would be his thing. I think he would.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah,
I think, you know, because he's been on my show before. So it's not, and we, you know, I feel like we have a rapport, but I shouldn't even have to ask.
No question. No. Ooh. Okay. See, you touched the third rail. Can you say a little bit more about? Oh, yes. Why not?
Because we, first of all, have been doing this, and we do it very well. We do it better
Very
than
well.
anyone else, and I'm going to
No
say that with
question.
my full chest. So why
No
would you want to come to the best place to come to have a conversation about the things? Not just that we're going to read the book, but we're going to be fair, and we know some things.
No
So
question.
there's going to be a deeper conversation, and isn't that what you want? You know, so
Come on now.
I took the liberty of playing from the audiobook clips from his chapter 2, and then we talked about it, and then I posted that in YouTube, and of course we did it on the radio live. But you know, I'm doing a deeper dive from a governance position, which is
Yes.
where we should be having this conversation. This is a lot, and I'm grateful that he went on CBS Sunday Morning, and that Tony guy did what he did, because I don't think that conversation would have been had anywhere else. His conversation with Jon Stewart was brilliant. It was great. But again, you're still talking to people who are looking at us through a lens that is so cloudy,
no question,
so muddy,
no question,
so indoctrinated,
no question,
that
and so underinformed. Jon Stewart did a great job, relatively speaking. But Jon Stewart's on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of the white public-facing social news entertainment media. On a scale of 1 to 10, his is probably at 7 or 8. On a scale of engaging this text in the valences it should be engaged in, it was probably a 2. But I mean, we don't know enough to know that he didn't know enough to talk. That's and right. He used the broad, you know what I'm saying? And so whose challenge is that? I mean, you talked about it on the radio. Thank God for Knarrative and Nubia. Thank God for our going conversations, all the work you're doing 5-6 days a week now, formally. I mean, and Sunday thinking about it. Thank God for all that. Thank the ancestors. Thank each other for all of that. How much is it our obligation to be able to develop that ability to really, because he's calling for it in this book. He's demonstrating it in this book. And he's also, very honestly, to the point that you're raising and you have raised, he's also saying, this is what I don't know. You know, I just, do you think it was curious that the same year that the case for Black reparations came out was also the first time he had acquired a passport?
I haven't gotten that far. So
I got you. No. He's saying, you know, I'm sorry. Yes, when he this is deeper into the South Carolina chapter, because
I'm not there yet. I'm reading this. Okay.
Okay. Or no, that's good. Okay. In the chapter on Senegal, because you know, like for the folks who haven't cracked it yet or haven't gotten it yet, you know, the first chapter he's writing to students at Howard about why he's writing, the power of writing. Let's start there. I'm gonna go back. The choice of George Orwell as to open the epigraph. Why are you laughing? I mean, in other words, we're gonna treat this brother with respect. Hey, y'all, this is not what we're doing. If somebody who is in our community, who loves his people, who loves humanity, a woman, a man, a person, and what do they say? It's easy to write, just open a vein, right? Who bleeds onto the page, take the time to do that and puts the time in. We owe them and our people, as he says in the chapter when he gets to Palestine and Israel, he realizes when he's there that when he wrote the case for Black reparations, he is part of a genealogy and he owes them, and he's there in Israel saying, I failed them. And that's what forces him to get into the thing, right? So I'm saying, with that in mind, what do you think? Why do you think he started with Why I Write, George Orwell? Because no Black people ever wrote anything about why they write. I mean, I'm just wondering. And maybe I don't know what you think, because you have written more of these books than he ever will. So no, I'm saying
I don't want to ever do that, because
no. I'm just saying quantitatively. I mean, I think at this point you got The Beautiful Struggle, you've got Between the World and Me, you've got We Were 8 Years in Power, you've got The Water Dancer, the novel, and then you got this one, The Message. That's 5. How many New York Times bestsellers did you collaborate on?
I mean, but
okay, how many books?
Okay, 30s.
You know, 30, exactly. So I'm saying, hopefully, you know what, but I'm saying right now,
right?
You know how to make choices. You know how to move stuff. You know how to be true to the narrative, and at the same time, commercially viable. So, what are those choices? Help us.
I would never quote a single white person in any book that I do moving forward. Me personally,
you waited.
No, I wouldn't, and there's no shade, but it's accessible, right? It's accessible. Like I used to have Cicero on my wall. You know, I used to have, he used to have that quote. I don't have it anymore, because when you are immersed in understanding that before Cicero, there were a bunch of people that we will never know, but for us putting names to it. And every time I see unknown African proverb, I'm like, there was a person. And maybe Cicero wasn't a person that said that. And they just slap it because that's how myth making happens. So it's time for us to start slapping some African names on really powerful African proverbs. So 100 years from now, somebody will have a name to, evoke when they say a quote, as opposed to African proverb. We're so comfortable with that. And we don't ever question Plato, Cicero, Socrates, or we don't ever question it as if who was there, who wrote it, who wrote it down to say that they said it, and when you put your own folk in, that was a powerful quote. Maybe it came from an African, but I'm gonna say Cicero said it. I'm gonna say Cicero, although the Africans had books way before. Okay, this makes sense.
Yeah. But and they've established that there wasn't a Homer. I mean, the Hellenists pretty much say Homer wasn't no Homer. It was the Iliad and the Odyssey. They was chanting that for centuries before.
And there's a question about Shakespeare. Was it an African woman who, But it shows you the power that whatever you codify into law on paper and put it out into the universe will last forever. So you have to be real mindful about, because I'm always thinking 100 years from now, somebody's gonna pick this up. What are they gonna? What do I want to tell somebody 100 years from now about this time, about me, about what I'm writing about?
Yeah, that's right.
But I get why he did it, and I think it was a powerful.
Sure, sure. Well, and plus, and I was using the ham-fisted language. Kind of, the question was kind of ham-fisted in the sense that, obviously there are political considerations, and then of course there's an editorial process. His friend and comrade Chris Jackson, who told him, of course, in the what was it, in the New York Magazine review we talked about last week, Jackson was like, you can't come in writing about reparations as if you Columbus you didn't discover and that's when he said, yeah, I can't do it. He didn't want to do that. And in here he says, I'm there, and I'm like, no, I came from a tradition and I must be true to that tradition. Later on I'll quote it, but so it was kind of ham-fisted for me to say that, because I know they're editors, they're marketers, all that, and that's so.
But they're editors and they're marketers. I mean, we've had lengthy conversations with Michael Harriot about the power of that book getting out was through us getting it out, because the publishers or editors may not have understood where the market is. They don't know where the market is. They're going where they're comfortable, where they think they're people. And Ta-Nehisi can break through because there's controversy. But who's this book for is the question. And how, as a publisher, and even if there are black faces in those houses are white. They're very, very white. They could be a black person at the helm, very, very white, sensibility wise, because they've been plowed into this way of thinking about us. Very, I don't even say traditionally, very skewed, right? So it's only, and let me just be 100% honest, sitting with you the last 4+ years has opened up how sullied my understanding of this thing. I always thought I was blackity black because of the house I came out of, but there are levels to this, because you're still praying to a white God in the sense of like, I want this to be successful. I want this to be successful, and success always means white acceptance, especially in the publishing realm, right? So when I look at Clay Cane, the Griff, that book was completely catapulted by us, and he knows that, right?
Yeah.
So do we need them to validate us when we have ourselves? And more importantly, the them is everybody, but the source has to be here and go out, just like our music. So we are okay accepting that country, rock and roll, all of this came with the source of African ways of knowing. The Beatles side by side, the Rolling Stones side by side, Tina Turner, Little Richard, Elvis, Big Mama Thornton. I mean, we know the genealogy of all of the greats come through us, but we don't sit in that and then reverse engineer it from the standpoint that the wild success can come through this and be us. We don't have to abdicate. We don't have to abdicate. Oh, well, white people don't.
And be us.
First of all, Ta-Nehisi in the first 2 chapters tells you it's a made-up construct.
It's a made-up.
What do we? So can we construct our own success? If it was constructed, can we construct the thing that needs to happen next, which is, the kind of equity that we listen.
No. Can we? We can, right?
Yes, we can. Yes, I
I
believe
mean,
it. We would
you're
be
turning
listen, I wouldn't do this, get up every Saturday. And let me just say, like,
exactly.
I don't get it. There's no monetary value to me being here in Nubia
Yes,
or even
yes,
doing Nubia. I take
yes,
nothing from it, but I get
yes,
everything from it because it opens up the possibilities of what we can get done when we work together. So I'm in
yes.
this, Saturday mornings. I got plenty other things to do, Dr. Carr.
No question.
It's
Listen,
like, but we're
you know, I
here.
know.
Yeah, and this man, let me tell y'all, he ain't even try like the money. There's
No,
nothing. Okay, this man
no,
makes us
no,
fill out the
that's not
paperwork
true.
so we can pay you.
That's not
But
true.
you, nope.
Look,
But I'm just
look. It. All I'm saying is that we know what sacrifice is, and you're helping us understand choices that are made behind the choices we see. Ta-Nehisi's book has a global readership. He's injecting a lot of things. Uh, it's no credit to him. Not that we're talking about credit to deficits, but a credit to his parents, to his mother and father, that every time somebody puts his name in their mouth, they're going back to ancient Egypt. Even if he himself gives a very, shall we say, limited demonstration of concept of why we study ancient Africa. We'll come to that too, because it's not about always being pharaohs and royalty and idealism. And I mean, even the choices again, which we owe him. I think he would
chapter on
do more.
Pharaoh.
Yeah, Pharaoh. Yeah, I mean, I'm saying I would love to, and I imagine whenever we sit with him. And by the way, he was at Howard on Thursday night. He has done that. He did that for Between the World and Me. In fact, when we were doing freshman seminar, we're still doing freshman seminar. I picked Between the World and Me. I read that summer, but I didn't. It wasn't the only book we read, because as soon as I was thinking, oh, maybe we should do Between the World and Me for the first year students, he reached out wanting to launch the book at Howard, because he loves Howard. That's his thing. Okay, no problem. I said, okay, well, this is what we'll do then. We will then use Between the World and Me, because you want to bring it here and it's going to be huge and everybody's talking about it, and that will put the attention on the Black institutions. So that's to his credit. But then I picked another book as well. This is going to be the only freshman seminar we picked two books. Why? Because I don't think Between the World and Me is enough to sustain, and certainly not the trajectory that what we were trying to do in freshman seminar, which is one of the reasons they had to get rid of us, because it's like, this is too Black. You're dealing with intellectual work, not entertaining teenagers. Okay, and you're not obsessed with race. So we got Claudia Rankin's book, Citizen, and she came and talked about her book later in the semester. It's the only time we did two books in freshman seminar. But I'm bringing that up to say that in that process, what we got a glimpse of is something Paul talks about all the time when he published Walter Mosley's book and busts up in them New York suites and says, Black Classic Press is an operation that is very dear to Black people. But when you start swimming in the water with them sharks and you realize that their budgets are this big and your budget is like this, he said it almost killed us to publish Gone Fishing. Because now that we're not talking about 1,000 books or 500 books or five. No, they want how many to go where, and the distributor. And so he said he was grateful for the experience. But I'm saying Ta-Nehisi makes a choice, and then the machine around him makes a choice. And so I just don't know. That's why I asked you, which is another thing I wanted to ask you. On the verso page of the dedication, he's got for my son, Samori and Chris. And then on the left, it says copyright 2024 BCP Literary. That's Black Classic Press. What does that say to you? I see that look on you. I don't know. I'm asking you as somebody who knows.
Again, listening, I didn't get to see that because I didn't have
right,
a book.
Right.
I like that. I like it. I also like that we are having this conversation, because but for him, we wouldn't be having.
That's right.
Like it. There are rungs in this bridge that need to be built for us to get to the place we need to go. And if he provides an entree for anybody to open their perspective on the world, history, where we are, I think, more of that. And I even like his self-examination, right? If I feel like far too many of us, we get stuck on a thing because we don't want to admit we were wrong, because somehow being wrong is a weakness. Not that it's a human condition, because we're always going to be wrong about something. It's part of being human. It's part of being human. You're wrong a lot more than you're right, but the wrong gets you to right. So if you don't embrace wrong, then how do you ever get to right? And then if you double down on wrong, then we all follow you over the cliff. in your wrongness because we like you, because you said some things that touched something in us.
Yes.
And then you got all these people following you, and you're like, we're going in the wrong direction.
Yes.
Who wants to
Yes.
say that, right? A person with character would, and say, hey, we're going down the wrong path. We're going to go over this cliff. Let's turn around. Now, maybe half the people won't turn around because they are committed to something.
Right.
But we have to be open to the possibility that everything that we've been taught is wrong.
That's right.
Everything. And,
That's right.
and it's
and he's very much open to that.
Yes,
No
and I
question.
love that about him. That's what I'm saying. Like, we need more people who say, oh, you know, that last book I wrote, you could throw that away. Because I was, you know, because at every stage we learn more things. And I wouldn't expect somebody to be that consistent over time when more information is being presented to them and they're just going to double down on wrong. But this is where we are. This is where we are, right? Whether we look at the political landscape or any, people will double down on wrong for saving face. And it's ego, it's everything but what we need, which is truth. So if that's wrong, then let's get on the right path. And okay, we walk 10 miles here. All right, then you got to walk 10 miles back and then another 10. That's fine. That's 20 miles. Put the time in. It's okay. It's okay. You'll build some extra muscles. You'll be a little tired, but it's better than keep going down this road where we shouldn't be. So I appreciate Ta-Nehisi's honesty, even his reflection on how he was judging Africa. I was like, oh, me too. I did that too. Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. We're gonna talk about that too, because again, that's critical. And in fact, what I'm doing now is, for folks who might want to look at it, I put in both chats the conversation that we had at Howard when Between the World and Me came out for the freshman seminar, and now I'm putting in Mario Beatty, that we had him come in on I'm saying Ta-Nehisi. I have to do that because I'm not used to it. I am used to it in that spelling, and it always makes me, which is a beautiful thing. Anyway, I just put in both chats as well. During that year when Between the World and Me came out, we only did freshman seminar for the fall semester, and so we had a series of lectures that kind of led in, and then the students, we did week by week, we went through the book, and then Ta-Nehisi came in. But because the book launched early in the semester, we had read only part of it before he came for the event, and so we did that. But Mario Beatty gave a lecture where he put the Between the World and Me, put it in the context of what we know in ancient Egyptian will be called a sebait, or a teaching. Sebait, or teaching, an instruction. Often you will see in ancient Egyptian literature the teaching like a moral instruction, like the book of Taotep, book of Kagemi, the instructions for Mary Carre, or the book of Keti. You'll see them written in the form of a parent to a child. Often, I think pretty much exclusively, which is tragic. Again, we're not going back to Egypt because we are trying to be pharaohs, but we'll get to that. We're going back because that's our grounding, and we'll get to that too. But everyone I've read, everyone I've studied, everyone I've seen, the deep scholars of classical Africa who have to learn the language to be really in that first rank, have been fathers to sons. I'm saying parent to child, in the hope that ultimately that there are manuscripts of which I'm unaware, and realizing that women and men, that male and female, that everybody in a community makes up a community. And we see in ancient Egypt a very different articulation, even among the very small fraction of things that survive to this day in terms of material record or writing. We see that deeply interwoven in the society, even as we see it skewed heavily in the male direction. It is not exclusive, and in some ways it is not only not exclusive, it is fundamentally female. Particularly, we start talking about Ma'at, Seshet, Sekhmet. You start talking about the whole concept of female, even in the language. But anyway, story for another day. What Mario Beatty did, and I put it in both chats, is linked Ta-Nehisi and Between the World and Me into the long view genealogy of Sebaites, or teachings, parent to child, father to son instruction. Because remember, he writes Between the World and Me as a long letter to his son Samori. And so this book, The Message, he writes as a long essay from himself to his students. In the fall of 2022, he taught a class in at Howard University, a writing class, and for 2 weeks of that class had a retreat with his friend and comrade Eve Ewing, a fine scholar, artist. She herself kind of played around in comic books and did some good work for Marvel. Ironheart, if y'all know Riri Williams, who we saw a glimpse of in Wakanda Forever. Eve wrote that comic for a time. Also, Race in the Schoolyard. I think I usually keep one. I keep a copy there. I put so much in storage. Okay, that in addition to Prof, and you said this on the radio, you said this book makes me want to write. And reading what he wrote to his students at the beginning of The Message, which is not a very long book, as he said to the clown who interviewed him on, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't call him a clown. That's an insult to clowns. As he said to the guy on at CBS, whose name I, have purposely kind of not sat for 3 seconds to memorize, because he's, after all, a stand-in for everybody else that wanted a piece of him. Although I do remember the name Gayle King, who was probably hamstrung by her own ambition from intervening in any way other than to say that it's complicated, but you don't think it is. Talk about Palestine. 230 pages, 232 pages. The first chapter of Journalism is Not a Luxury, where he talks about his students. It did make me think how many stories, how many times that you and I have spent, and everybody in these spaces that we're in every week have spent as teachers from the youngest age all the way to up to and through the eldest age in every venue. He talks about teaching in prisons. He talks about teaching in community centers. He talks about teaching and learning in colleges, and in this case, a retreat. If I thought about all the times that I could have and should have reduced some of those interactions to print, although Jacques Berliner-Blau, who was a professor at Georgetown University, wrote a book called Classroom Confidential, I think is the name of it. Berliner-Blau is the guy. Berlin, Berlin, I think it's E or ER, BLAU is the last syllable, Blau. Jacques Berliner-Blau, JAQUES, Berliner-Blau, talks about the fact that in classrooms, uncensored, unfiltered classrooms, there are often things that are said that could be considered truly unfortunate, because people saying stuff in the process of teaching and learning. And so even talking about what you did in a classroom is a radical form of editing. You're editing what you wrote, and then you're editing what you chose out of the interactions. And knowing, having taught at HBCU at Howard in particular for 24 years now and counting, and having taught for another 10 years before that in various formations, Philadelphia Freedom School still being my base of operations at heart in many ways, and Temple, Ohio State, community centers like South Street. Shout out to South Street Community Center in South Nashville, Tennessee, when I was young, right out of college. But what you then can shoehorn into a chapter here, as is Chapter 1, Journalism is Not a Luxury, that begins on page 3 and ends on page 20, so 17 pages. You got to make some radical decisions. And so even reading that and thinking, man, I could write a chapter or more on every class. This week, shout out to my students at the Howard University School of Law. We looked at the subject matter field of education, reviewed Brown versus Board of Education, took it all the way up through Dobbs. I'm not Dobbs, that's abortion, through SFFA, Students for Fair Admission, a lie by the billionaire Ed Bloom, one that's backfiring now if you look at the admission rates in these so-called elite colleges for Asian students, and check that out. But in the process of conversation, because I'm at a Black space with Black students from all over, I got students who parents came from, and some of them were born in places from Sudan to Ghana, Nigeria, here in the United States, folks from Ohio and Illinois, Chicago, New York, Mississippi. I mean, you name it. I only have 15 in that class. I lowered the cap by 10 because, they right. And so they're writing every week. So I got to read that. I'm obligated to read it, and I'm enjoying reading it. But, you know, if I put 25 in there in a writing intensive class, it becomes a little bit more difficult. But anyway, I'm going all that as background saying, reading Ta-Nehisi's work, I'm thinking, man, I think about the obligation to record by writing. And he talks about how his handwriting was so terrible, and even how that people he talked to may have said maybe he had ADHD as a child, but thank God for the word processor, right? But I think about how we do have to record. We do have to commit to memory and passing on from generation to generation some of our memories, and how so many of the classroom conversation we had Wednesday night at Howard University School of Law was so powerful around the concept of what it means to have standards, what it meant to have standards in the segregated school, what it meant to have standards in the Brown era, what it meant to have standards 10 years later with Swan versus, no, more than 10 years later, about 17 years later with Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg and busing, what it meant in the generation that I came of age in, which was that generation, the busing generation, then to these young people's generation, which is now 2 generations past, when we start talking about everything from selecting students out to go to private school, what it means to be in a magnet school, how, I mean, all of that through Black lenses and through a kind of polyglot of Black lenses, because these are 15 different Black people, but they're all Black. So the discussions that emerged out of class tensions, the idea that somehow we could conceive of a common future that could contribute in a way that would lift all of us at the same time. How do we balance that with the attitude that if you got the requisite training and opportunity, you should find a way to leave the community in order to bring the community with you? That's the Black conservative view, and we had that view expressed. All of that, I'm thinking, now when we leave here, it's going to resonate in these students' minds and in my minds, but if we're going to get past 16 people, it's going to have to be reduced to print. So again, kudos to Ta-Nehisi Coates for capturing some of that in this first chapter, and as you said, Prof, in the honesty that he demonstrated in this chapter, for saying that one of the things he did in that first semester at Howard, teaching in the fall of 2022, before he went to Senegal, which is where I understand it, where he told John Stewart, he went to Senegal in September of that year, and then went to Israel in the following spring or early part of 2023, and including telling those students, look, all y'all got to write an essay for this class, and I'm gonna write one too. And then he says in here, I failed to write my essay, so maybe I'm still not as good a student as I would like to be, like when I was an undergrad at Howard. But he said this is basically his semester project, which you can forgive him for, because it takes people time to write. And again, you know, unlike those of us who are full-time teachers, that's what we do all the time. He got a lot of other obligations, and at the center of his life, as he writes in here and as he said consistently, is writing. In another lifetime, in another formation, if we wasn't fighting a desperate fight to not only survive but to thrive, shout out to the apartheid man Elon Musk and his friend Donald John Trump, who are now returning to the scene of the crime today. I put crime in quotation marks. Butler, Pennsylvania. They going to Butler, Pennsylvania today. Why? Because you know, you got to rally the white supremacist troops. And just read another article of how Elon Musk is back channel funding a great deal of this propaganda that's being spewed all over social media. But you know, in that process, you know, writing in another world where we weren't fighting and didn't have to fight every day, I would probably been a musician, or at least a writer, since I was a child. But you know, Ta-Nehisi continued to place that at the center of his life and of his practice, and thank the ancestors for it. And you know, we're here because we got to play all the roles in order to get free. So today I thought that, you know, as we've already started, the question that we raise is justice delayed. Is justice delayed? Is it justice denied? You know, I started with, you know, and Prof, thank you for giving us some perspective on this guy, Pete Rose. And, you know, Pete Rose, like all these athletes, they got the little books that they claim to have written, and Pete Rose did, including the book on hitting, you know, and I got all those books. But this is the latest book that came out on Pete Rose. I got this back in the spring. Charlie Hustle, The Rise and Fall of Pete Rose in the Last Glory Days of Baseball. This is Keith O'Brien's book. O'Brien is from Cincinnati. He now lives in New Hampshire, but he's written for the New York Times, Washington Post, National Public Radio. It's a fascinating book, 430 some pages. And in it, he tracks Pete Rose. And it's interesting. One of the things he says is in 2023, sports betting was a $100 billion business. That was 2023 by his estimate. I'm thinking maybe more. But he said that's enough to buy every team in Major League Baseball and have billions left over. So to keep Pete Rose out of the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame, because he bet on baseball after you made baseball betting legal. And Pete Rose says famously after the now superstar pitcher, outfielder for the Los Angeles Dodgers is lighting up Major League Baseball and threatening to wreck the record book. And then they caught bets being made out of his bank account in the millions. And he threw his translator said it was him. And they got the translator and left him alone. Pete Rose said, see, if only I'd had a translator back then, I'd have been all right. But the whole point is that, you know, and like a lot of people who are writing in the chats now about Rose and the Reds, you know, I was a kid. I mean, I love those teams. The Oakland A's too, by the blue. Obviously, Burt Campaneris, Blue Moon Odom, all those black players that we've talked about in previous sessions of in class. You know, Rose got left holding the bag, but what Keith O'Brien talks about in here, which I think is fascinating, is Pete Rose's what he meant to American culture, to U.S. culture. And, you know, when Bart Giamatti makes this principled moral stand in his mind, and then Rob Manfred, the current Major League Baseball employee of the owners, commissioner, Bud Selig in between that, you know, they got this haughty attitude toward Pete Rose, who is now dead. You know, you got to ask, you know, why was that? And it was justice delayed. And now it's justice denied in many ways. And what he writes, O'Brien, says that society changed around Pete Rose. You know, by the time Pete Rose stands on first base in September 1985, having reached his hit total, it puts him now at 4,100 and some hits, making him the all-time hit leader for some time. He passed Ty Cobb long before that, and then he put it somewhere within that. Then nobody's going to make that many hits in Major League Baseball again. And so but Pete Rose, he says by the time he gets to 1985, the league is changing. He says the writers have changed. And that's a good thing in some ways, in terms of more writers who ain't just, you know, old white men who never played nothing, that wouldn't throw rice at a wedding, wouldn't bust a grape in a fruit salad, sitting up in a thing saying, I don't want to say Roberto every time. I'm going to call you Bobby, and then get mad at Roberto Clemente because he won't let him do it. I mean, those writers are receding a little bit, and they're being replaced by new generations. And the face of white Major League Baseball has changed. The black players that came in after Robinson, not counting the ones that were there before him who claimed that they were Indian or something else and they let them play, but they didn't know or knew and winked. They're flooding in. Up to a third of Major League Baseball is of African descent by the time Rose retires. You understand? They speak in Spanish, they speak in English. I don't talk about blacks and Latinos except to make a distinction within a larger group of African people. Many of them, the majority of them, talking about somebody from the Dominican Republic, stop playing it. But at any rate, Cuba, it's not Puerto Rico, Roberto Clemente, come on now. But he talks about how Rose was projected onto him. I won't make the comparison with Caitlin Clark, shout out to Cheryl Swoops, but I would say that you can say that he was the great white hope for a lot of white people. He's the white working class. In fact, what O'Brien says, he wasn't even working class, he was poor. But that also made him expendable as the game changed and society changed. Now they want to distance themselves from that. So they're going to hang him on the drinking. They're going to hang him on the gambling. Then he ends up stepping out on his wife with all these women that he chronicles here, including a girl who was 15 years old, who claimed she was 16, and his defense was she said she was 16. Okay, that's indefensible. And, you know, people like Keith Olbermann said that's enough to keep him out the Hall of Fame. Well, then I'm gonna go up to Cooperstown, who I called, by the way. Remember this summer when they had the game down there, and Roy Wood covered it in part, and Reggie Jackson said what he said at Rickford Field in Birmingham. I called up to Cooperstown because they had played a game up there before. And we talked about that in session, in class, in one of the sessions. We talked about the black players up there, and Griffey and all them were up there. And I'm looking for materials. Did y'all have a book? Was there an exhibition catalog? I mean, game program? They're like, nah, we didn't do. Yeah, why? Because you want to do that to give yourself credit. You want to bring in a sliver of statistics from the Negro Leagues to burnish your reputation as the paragon mount and summit of the holy grail of the shrine for Major League Baseball. But you want to do it on the cheap So you're not going to bring all the Josh Gibson's home runs in. You're going to bring a few of them, and then you'll say, see, now we've integrated baseball. No, Josh Gibson died without ever swinging a bat in your funky cracker league. And Andrew Rube Foster, when they started the Negro Leagues in 1920 in Chicago, was like, my dream is to integrate not individuals, but teams. Can the Yankees beat the Pittsburgh Crawfords? The answer is no. Can the Dodgers in Brooklyn beat? No, you can't beat the Homestead Grays. But you're going to cherry pick a few off the Kansas City Monarchs and bring in Satchel Paige when you're 1,000 years old. And in 2024, pat yourself on the back for being integrated now and recognizing the contributions of blacks to the game. Even Willie Mays said, deuces, I'm going to be an ancestor by the time y'all come down there and try to put my name in your mouth. Because even in life, I did the best I could. But y'all going to give y'all self credit for being generous after we're all dead. Justice delayed is justice denied. And in Pete Rose's case, you see that it's not just white on black crime, it's white on white crime, because the great white hope of one era becomes the embarrassment of the next era, and you let Pete Rose die, begging you, Rob Manfred, to get in the Hall of Fame, because he know between the lines there was nobody who got more base hits and who ever get probably more base hits in Major League Baseball than Pete Rose. Justice delayed in that sense is justice denied. And so what O'Brien writes finally is society changed. Pete Rose didn't change. He was the same dude when he broke into the league in the 60s as he was when he died this week. So that's just a small gesture toward what Ta-Nehisi Coates is doing in this book. And I'll make the connection this way. Ta-Nehisi writes a lot in this book, The Message, about the power of memory, the power of shrines, the power of rituals, like going to Goree Island, even though the vast majority of us, and probably only a tiny fraction of us who ended up in human trafficked into the Western Hemisphere, only a tiny fraction of us came from Goree. But Goree is symbolic. And this is his first trip to Africa. And so he's giving us a sense of the importance of shrines and of symbols. So that's why the Baseball Hall of Fame is important to white Major League Baseball and to the United States of America, because it's a shrine that allows you to engage in a ritual of convening that allows you to enshrine icons, which are typically figures of uncritical praise. Uncritical praise. So all these people who played in the pre-desegregation era are figures of uncritical praise. You understand? The only one caught a stray was Shoeless Joe Jackson. Ironically, out of South Carolina. But we'll come back to South Carolina because we got a chapter in here on it. The whole idea is that these become shrines. You know, you go to Israel and you got shrines, the Dome of the Rock, you got shrines, Al-Aqsa. But the Israelis keeping the Palestinians and any Muslim from coming over there, because these are shared sites of ritual importance and iconic importance. In the case of the Muslims, the place where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, ascended, it is said, ascended, as it is said. They can't even go over there because the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all of them claim those sites. But now they are part of a settler logic, of a violent settler logic. And as Ta-Nehisi told that guy on CBS in the interview, you know, countries don't exist by right. They exist through force. In a country in this world that doesn't exist through force, including all the places that we are from, which exist because Europeans drew lines and then left and said, y'all have to honor these lines. What am I looking for? What am I looking for? I'm looking for, that's Thursday's paper. Give me a second, y'all. This is Friday's paper. I think, no, that's okay. I think I took, see, that's what happens when I switch the papers out, and I also switched the bags I was carrying. I think I switched, I know what I did. I switched bags. I'm not gonna go back there and get this bag because I remember this. You all heard Lamont and I talking yesterday. If you have a Sirius XM subscription, when we were on Urban View Mornings, and mentioned that the British Empire has given up Diego Garcia, which is an island off of Mauritius, not Mauritius, as I said yesterday, erroneously. Lamont corrected me. Thank you, brother. Mauritius, that island where they still have a base, but they've given full control now, except for that base they use with the United States military base, because they got to have a place to attack. By the way, they're arguing now as we speak. Poor Lloyd Austin. I say poor Lloyd Austin. The military's been good to him. He's Secretary of Defense. But the more troops that the United States sends into the region of the Gulf, the more troops that the United States sends close in proximity to where Israel has opened its continuing indiscriminate war on humanity in that region. The question is it emboldening BB, the mass murderer, or is it giving them the signal that we're not going to put up with this? It's clearly the former, not the latter. And of course, BB is working hard to get Donald Trump reelected, because once that happens, then they're just going to take off everything and kill everybody over it if they can, and so that Jerry can build his condos. The Democrats and the Republican Party are the same. They are not the same. On this issue, in terms of foreign policy, they're virtually the same in some ways, because after all, Israel, they're not interested in protecting the rights of Jews or anybody else. They're interested in foreign policy goals and objectives of the United States of America, and Israel serves those goals. So let's just look at this cold, as Mario Beatty would say. But anyway, as I was saying, the whole process that Ta-Nehisi has entered and approached is really about exposing the power of myth making, exposing the power of stories, exposing the power of words. And so when he is in that region and he goes to the International Holocaust Memorial, and he is moved to see this, and then he spends time with the Palestinians and he sees the connections, what he's laying bare is something he starts at the beginning of the book, which is the power of stories. And I thought that, continuing in the vein of the conversation that has been sparked because of not what he wrote, but the reaction to what he wrote from defenders of this funky ass settler logic world we are living in. So it's not what he wrote, it's how he's been responded to that people are ordering this book. Let's be very clear about that. You know, I figured that we should probably spend some time with the book. So I want to go forward again, asking whether justice delayed is justice denied, with some basic questions. What happens? What happens when justice is delayed? Pete Rose, that's a small thing, but it was huge to him, and now he's dead. If for too long, or with too effective or prolonged opposition, we're going to talk about South Carolina and his book being banned, and him going to the school board meeting with the lady, Mary Wood, the teacher, the white teacher. You know, is it inevitable that justice be permanently denied? If it is accurate that, as Ta-Nehisi writes in here, that politics is the art of the possible, but art creates the possible of politics. Again, if politics is the art of the possible, that's what they say. So my man Cornel West, my sister Melina Abdullah running for president, this Claudia De La Cruz running for president, Jill Stein running for president. Y'all not gonna be president. Politics is the art of the possible. Kamala Harris is not who I will vote for if it was a campaign between Kamala Harris and a lot of other people. But guess what? Kamala Harris is probably the upper extent to which you can have somebody at the top of the two-party ticket in this country and get them in the office of the presidency. Politics, the art of the possible. Now, you can write a movie. You can write a novel like Irving Wallace did, turn into a movie called The Man that starred James Earl Jones as the black president. Hell, you can make Morgan Freeman the president. And at this point, using Bill Cosby's language and Bill Cosby and the Cosby Kids, 11 billion movies. And they ain't real. Now, you know the running joke that, yeah, y'all made Morgan Freeman the president after a rock hit the earth and the water came up. Anyway, I understand. But the point is this. You can make black people do anything. You can build a Wakanda, where Ta-Nehisi says even Wakanda is threatening. When I went to that South Carolina meeting, the problem is this Afrofuturism thing is a problem. Why? Because while politics is the art of the possible, you go to the war with the army you have, not the army you wish you had, quoting Donald Rumsfeld. But I guess in a bizarro world where an open enemy of so many of the things that many of us in here believe in and fight for, that open enemy can stand over the shoulder of Kamala Harris and endorse her to be the president of the United States. Yes, I'm talking about Lynn Cheney. Politics is the art of the possible. Can't nobody defend Lynn Cheney. Lynn Cheney being embraced as a whole ass patriot because she said Donald Trump should be impeached. Duh. And she says Kamala Harris should be endorsed over Donald Trump. Duh. But guess what? It ain't duh if politics is the art of the possible, and this is the limited universe you're operating in. I thought it ironic standing in a little city that claims that it is the birthplace of the Republican Party in the 1850s, 1854, that Liz Cheney will be standing behind Kamala Harris over her left shoulder. I'm saying the metaphors, the jokes write themselves. Yes, Lynn Cheney to the left of Kamala Harris saying, I endorse her to be the president because I'm a patriot, she a patriot. What does it mean to be a patriot? And why y'all trying to claim that word anyway? You can have that word in the whole funky settler enterprise. Edward Said got something to say about that, and Ta-Nehisi quotes him in the message. But the point is, if politics is the art of the possible, what happens when art creates the possible of politics? This is where the writers come in. This is where the artists come in. This is where the thinkers come in who create an imagined world. And this is where on the weekend before Amiri Baraka's birthday coming up, if you're around Sankofa this weekend, they're doing a film retrospective. They're having a tribute to Amiri Baraka today, I think. Today or tomorrow. Y'all look it up in the chat. I'll look in the chats in a minute to see if you find it. I think it's I know it's at 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon at Sankofa. There's going to be a convening, including some people like Tom Porter, Baba Tom Porter, who knew and were very close friends with Baraka. They're going to talk about him. And I thought about Baraka. I think about Baraka a lot when I read Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's very interesting, but I want to continue. So what happens when justice is delayed? If for too long or with too effective or prolonged opposition, is it inevitable that it be permanently delayed? If it is accurate that politics is the art of the possible, but art creates the possible of politics, as Coates writes here, what is the responsibility of the artist to imagine not only transforming positive social change, but helping to create a world, or imagining even a world, in which deep memory informs the future? Because he said it's really about the future. That's what he's been saying. It's about the future, the present and the future. Well, what's the relation between deep memory and the future? And what happens when the artist, when the cultural meaning maker, to use our Africana Studies conceptual categories framework? Shout out to everybody who's in the course now, as we'll enter week 4 on Monday night. What happens when the artist, the cultural meaning maker, mixes, commingles their own individual, as in Ta-Nehisi's case in this book, and group, as he's struggling to find this larger concept of blackness, which has him in Senegal evoking Alain Locke, coming back to that in a minute, group memory with that of other groups, with that of other individuals, creating a shared humanity. Like August Wilson said, I'm not writing for a Black audience, I'm writing out of a Black experience to the world. Ta-Nehisi's trying hard to do that. He's achieving it. Writing out of his Black memory, out of his concept of Blackness and group Blackness to the world, to everybody who wants to read it. And until he comes in Nubia and we have a conversation, and and we sit, we're all gonna sit there and we'll get that. Harold French did it. I mean, Ta-Nehisi will do it. The schedule's probably got him booked in all the big white venues. That's fine. But at some point, the governance formation will emerge, because that's what he emerges out of, as you say, Prop. What happens when that shared humanity connects, that commingling connects, and then that threatens to topple violences based on maintaining differences? Because that's what it's going to do. That's why this becomes a threat. We got to jump on this guy. Why? We can't let you talk about those people as human. I spent the first part of the chapter talking about Jews as human, Israelis rather. I'm not going to say Jews, because there are a lot of Jews who are not Israeli, as we know. As we were talking, Tammy Sawyer, who, of course, Clerk Sawyer, the Honorable Tammy Sawyer out in West Tennessee in Memphis, Shelby County Clerk, who was present for the reading of the verdicts for the Tyree Nichols case, and who called in yesterday morning on Sirius with Lamont and I to tell us what that was like. And there were only 2 elected officials in there, she and Justin Pearson, and then there was a previous city council person who was there the previous day. And she said, as I sat there and listened to not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, today, I wanted to moan. And then I look at Ms. Tyree Nichols' mother and says, if she can be strong, I got to be strong. And then they got to the guilty, but the guilty verdict was for obstruction of justice, which of course protects the funky ass city of Memphis. And it doesn't matter when you have Black elected officials. I don't care that you're mayor, the police chief, doesn't matter, female, male, doesn't matter. You are now, what you going to do when Nichols' family comes and says, where's the money? Because Ben Crump found the civil suit. That's what he's best at in many ways, or at least among other things. getting publicity, bringing attention, all that very important and vital work. Mr. Outside, Al Sharpton called him Black America's Attorney General. That's nice. If he's the outside Black America's Attorney General, then inside Black America's Attorney General would be Kristen Clark, who, of course, it was announced today that they'll be wrapping up by December. They're using the Emmett Till Act to engage in an investigation of the Tulsa massacre of 1921. That's Kristen Clark, who has been hitting with both fists. Both parties are the same, of course. So I guess it wouldn't matter if Kamala Harris is elected president of the United States and you see Kristen Clark going up Capitol Hill for her confirmation hearings to be the Attorney General. I think it would matter a whole hell of a lot. Ask those elders if it matters who is running the Attorney General's office, and stop playing in your head, because politics is often the art of the possible. Unless you want to write a screenplay where you imagine an all Black everything world, which is why Black people love Wakanda so much, you must understand that, as Ta-Nehisi writes, art creates the possibility of politics, but politics is the art of the possible. Let's be clear. Let's be very crystal clear. But thinking about this in this context, let's spend a little bit more time on this. So when we talk about the role of the artist, Ta-Nehisi is an artist. He's a cultural meaning maker. What is the responsibility of those with an outsized platform, can reach more people at once? What we're doing is invaluable. It's invaluable to all of us, every last one of us. Ta-Nehisi has written something that, as he writes in here in that last chapter on Palestine, previous generations have done work. But for him, he's saying, but they were often, as he calls them, autodidacts, self-trained. My father was an autodidact. My daddy didn't get a chance to get out of what we would call junior high school, in Buffalo Valley, Tennessee. And then a couple of years after that, he's drafted in World War II with three of his brothers. But my father read and wrote every day of his life, no matter how long he worked a stretch at the Veterans Administration Hospital, where he worked for years, many times leaving our house 4 a.m. in the morning before we had a car, by foot. Hayward Carr read and wrote. When I wrote his obituary, I used his words as the framing epigraph, because that's my father. You understand? And the Sabaeat he left us was the Sabaeat, the teaching of his life. And in another world, he'd have been a scholar. So guess what? Part of the reason that I read and write and teach and be in community is because I'm animated by that. He and my mother, who wanted to be a teacher, but she didn't get out of what we call junior high school in Alabama. But guess what? Catherine Carr, every day of her life, the Sabaeat was her teaching. The teaching was her life. And so part of the reason I'm in the classroom is because she couldn't be in the classroom, and we got to be in the classroom. And we all got stories like that. I'm just bringing them up now. But, Ta-Nehisi says, I come from generations of people who were self-trained scholars. They didn't get a chance to go to school. And I will remind him, and I think that all of us, I won't even say him, I remind all of us, I remind myself that they came from untold generations who were not in captivity. Did not our ancestors have ancestors? This is what Ta-Nehisi is going in search of in the chapter on Senegal, chapter 2 on pharaohs. We'll get there. It's unfortunate, I think, to frame the idea of pharaonic Kemet so under investigated, but it's a point of entry for which we should all be grateful. What is the responsibility of those with platform beyond the Yosef Ben Yakanins, beyond the Louis Michaud's in Harlem, beyond the Black bookstore networks of the 1970s and 80s when Ta-Nehisi was growing up, and right now when we are here? What is the responsibility of those who peek through and are talking to Joy Reid on one night on MSNBC, or Jon Stewart one night on Comedy Central, or I won't say Gayle King because she didn't say anything, the white dude and the brother that introduced him on CBS Morning? What is the obligation talking to Christine Amanpour on CNN? What is the obligation? Well, is your obligation now to represent us, as our ancestor Clyde Taylor might say in The Mask of Art? Is it to represent us? Well, Ta-Nehisi seems to think that it is. Because even with his individual genius, his individual gifts, his individual work ethic, his individual desire and hope, he still articulates very cleanly and clearly that I here am representing us. He didn't have to say that. You got some rogue Negroes that say, I don't represent nobody, I'm representing myself. And then only too happy to reap the benefits of being perceived to represent us by people, many of whom are our open enemies, who will put you in the spotlight precisely because they have an objective that's not yours. If anybody thinks for a split second that Kendrick Lamar will be performing at the Super Bowl simply because of his career and body of work, you're not paying attention. It's because they're not like us. And whoever sold that, shout out to Sean Carter if you had any role in it. After all, you parlayed the summer of 2020 into a nice little position being a broker. And as people often say in the debate between, what happened with Jay-Z, what happened to Dame and Jay-Z, well, I've heard the people talk about it. I'm not that close to it, but from what I understand, Dame Dash, like, I want to control everything. Jay-Z is like, I'm willing to talk to sing at Tom Brady's thing and get a check and pass that out to somebody else. I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman. Let me handle my business. Damn, yeah, that's a rap lyric, but in reality, it looks like you're an employee, friend. But at any rate, maybe minority owner, like a percentage, like in gentrified Brooklyn. But the story for another day, no problem. The point is this: what happens when you get a platform that allows you to speak beyond? Could you have lobbied for Weezy to perform in his hometown? Not that I have a dog in that fight, because I won't be watching either one of them. Maybe if Stevie Wonder came, I'd watch the replay the night it happened, but otherwise I'll watch it on the way to class so that I'll know what I'm talking about. But I'm not going to be participating in a spectacle where those with power have an agenda and they're going to use you for another agenda, whether it be bringing two of your statistics into Major League Baseball so y'all can say that y'all are better than you were, you racists, whether it be letting a few Negroes shake a jangle leg at $1 billion enterprise like the Super Bowl, and making sure Colin Kaepernick never threw a ball again, which sends the real message. Whether it be, and any of those things, what Ta-Nehisi is saying is that I do have an obligation if I'm in the space. So we understand why he's at the big white facing commercial news entertainment media doing the book tour. Things will calm down. He knows where he come from, and we'll have a conversation sooner or later. But what is the responsibility when you're in those spaces? Is it to tell what you think is the truth? Is to have responsibility, that genealogy? Is it to be honest as you can be, as they say about writing? It's not hard to write, open up a vein and bleed on the page. Well, since Amiri Baraka's birthday is the 7th of October, we can almost glance at him on the way toward Ta-Nehisi to look at the possibilities and limits of the artist speaking truth. Baraka was always looking for the forces behind the forces, even as he was a playwright and a poet, even as he wrote essays, even as he wrote criticism, even as he tapped into music with blues people and talked about the musical productions, the cultural meaning making of our people. Baraka was also a student of social forces, a student of history. I heard Ta-Nehisi tell Jon Stewart that he's a student of politics. He wants people to be students of politics. But Amiri Baraka was a student of politics, and he was in the arena, not only trying to study the explanatory social forces, but dealing with the motion of history. Ta-Nehisi talks about drawing off, as you heard Prof say, a drawing his mother did of his father as he's sitting reading a book at home. And Ta-Nehisi remembers thinking, what is my father searching for? Paul was searching then and searching to this moment for explanations, the story behind the story, trying to understand. Well, Baraka was in that world, but he was in the world and trying to understand and using that art, to borrow again from Coates in the chapter on South Carolina, to recognize and embody the idea that politics is the art of the possible, but art creates the possibility of politics. So justice delayed in the form of cutting our memories off after taking our bodies, justice delayed, and then not letting us study and reconnect. And then when we do study and reconnect, have us so thoroughly immersed in the funky ass social structure politics of race that we try to backmap that criminal concept into our memory. So we're looking for black pharaohs and for all the black people to have the same skin color, and are shocked when kind of Africans say, no, we will call y'all mixed, as what the Senegalese folk told Ta-Nehisi when he was there. Because you're looking at it through racial lens, and so are they. This is the thing that has invaded us. That's justice denied. That's justice delayed. It becomes justice denied when we don't break through that model with memory. sometimes that memory becomes a full narrative construct of fantasy, like Black Panther. Although, for my money, the best iterations of Black Panther, Husband, for example, draw on factual memory, or at least the memory of Africana cultural meaning making and ways of knowing that can be documented and attested, so that you don't just say T'Challa and T'Chaka. You say the Black Panther is the iteration of Bast. You go back to Kemet for the concept of the Neteru Bast, the panther, the cat, the feline. And that allows you a continuity of genealogy, that allows you a momentum of memory that doesn't have to ground to a specific time and place in terms of something that actually happened. But just like arguing over the historical Christ, you ain't got to argue over that. Take the metaphor and move it forward. Take the example and move it forward. The momentum of memory can work even with narratives of things that you have invented. And so, that strengthens and deepens the idea, and Baraka understands that. Mary Baraka co-chaired the 1972 Black Political Convention, Politics, the Art of the Possible. He's standing there, keeping that delegation together. These Blacks from all over the country trying to figure out how to create a Black political party. And the artist is the one with the imagination trying to, but he's also a pragmatist. He understands the limits of politics, even as he understands the artistic expression can have you dream a world that you might actually be able to one day implement, but you got to deal with the living now at the same time. Barack Obama voted for, Amir Baraka. I wish it would be artistic if Barack Obama could have voted for Amir Baraka, but Amir Baraka voted for Barack Obama and explained it in pragmatic terms and got roasted by younger generations and some of his comrades, and mostly younger generations, who seem to have confused the art of the possible with the possibility of art. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe Baraka was deeply conservative, as Sterling Brown once said to James Baldwin. This is in the documentary, Heard Through the Grapevine. They're sitting in Sterling Brown's office. Baldwin's talking to Sterling Brown. Sterling Brown says, I'd call you a revolutionary if you weren't so conservative. And then sits back and smiles. I might think the same thing about Ta-Nehisi Coates, make the same thing about myself. I call you a revolutionary. I call myself a revolutionary if I weren't so conservative. In other words, what you gonna do? I saw what you wrote. I saw what you tweeted. I saw what you typed in the chat. When Baraka said he voted for Barack Obama, and you went to say, see, that's a sellout, man. No, you ever been chased by the police with guns? You ever been beat up in Newark before the insurrections? You ever been in the middle of the Us-Panther conflict? You ever moved Kawaida all the way over the country? You know how many people been influenced by the ideas of Amiri Baraka, the art of Amiri Baraka? When you read, for example, but you want to be a revolutionary behind your keyboard, the hell up. This is an excellent anthology. I recommend it highly. This, of course, was published by Third World Press, which probably means it was printed by by Black Classic Press, Brother Coates. This is Hakeem Mahbooty, Sufisha Mahbooty in the crowd, and out of Third World Press, out of Chicago. This is called Razor, Amir Baraka, a series of essays over the arc of his life. Revolutionary Art for Cultural Revolution, Amir Baraka, Third World Press. See there? Third World Press, Amir Baraka. Razor, R-A-Z-O-R. This is from the essay that he published. Let me see, when did he publish this essay? This was from 1988. He made transition in 2014. The essay is entitled Langston, Du Bois, and McKay. Langston Hughes, W. Du Bois, Claude McKay. If We Must Die. Contradictions between art and politics during the Harlem Renaissance. And this is what he says. He's talking about Du Bois. He says, in 1961, when Du Bois became a member of the Communist Party by saying capitalism cannot reform itself, it is doomed to self-destruction. No universal selfishness can bring social good to all. Communism, the effort to give all men what they need and to ask of each the best they can contribute. This is the only way of human life. That's a quote. Baraka writes, this statement, among many others, sent the bourgeoisie scrambling in all directions to make Du Bois forever obscure. As he said, after defeating the government's attempt to characterize him as an agent of a foreign power, quote, now the children will no longer hear my name, end quote. So Du Bois, in his long, heroic life, which has yet to be properly analyzed, celebrated, and systematically taught as part of the requirements of our revolution, must be understood to be one of the classic petty bourgeois democratic intellectuals, a social scientist who found that truth cannot be discovered or presented without earth-shaking struggle, who by dint of his lifelong commitment to scientific truth is pressed into active political combat. His passion for his subject, humanity, connects him to the lives of people in a way there could be no betrayal. The people themselves, Baraka writes, were the truth. And it is this recognition of the passion inside him that made his politics and his scholarship the tip of a deep, deep love for the people themselves. Why is that important? It's important because Ta-Nehisi is writing with the people as his grounding, his parents, his community in Baltimore, the people he's engaged with, the students at Howard, the people in Senegal, the people he sees in Palestine, occupied Palestine and Israel. Grounding that allows for a common humanity that will threaten people, which is why I now want to read this last couple of sentences from Baraka in this essay where he writes, quote, the main baggage that Du Bois carried with him, and by extension that we all carry with us, particularly those who are artists, including Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is the subject today. The main baggage that Du Bois carried with him that had to be cast aside bag by bag at each juncture of his political development was the idealist notion that America wanted democracy. This flawed predicate of the middle-class Democrats' commitment to the American capitalist system was shattered for Du Bois by the obvious and continued torture of the African-American people and the parallel of such torture all over the Pan-African world. Why is that important? Baraka understood he lived in America. After all, this is the man who wrote the poem, Why Is We Americans? And as of this year, his son, Ras, the poet, 10 years in is the mayor of Newark. So he understands the art of the possible. He also understands the possibility of art. So you voted for Barack Obama and you write a poem entitled, Why Is We Americans? Where you envision a world where all reparations has been given and taken and now. And he says, and at the end of the poem, he's like, you know, either restore our lives or prepare to forfeit your own. This is a man who was poet laureate of New Jersey before they erased the position to get at him because he wrote a poem entitled Somebody Blew Up America. And they called him an anti-Semite, the nitroglycerin of insults. I'm not talking about labels. I'm talking about insults. When you decide you want to mute somebody, you know the language to use. Again, Ta-Nehisi writing in the message, words have this power. So, you know, Ta-Nehisi is engaged here in a process of pursuing truth, of having an excellent standard, of opening a vein, trying to be deadly honest. In that spirit, we think about Amiri Baraka, who adds another dimension, the very deliberate study, not as a journalist, not even in many ways as a historian, but as an artist who is reading social theory, who is living and working these ideas out in the street. This is what he's doing. Baraka's not doing this from a college campus, although he eventually ends up teaching in college campuses. He's not coming from the college campus to the community to give a talk. He's in the community, literally building with us, with the people. And then he's either the college campus, he's sharing stuff, but he's also writing the poems, he's writing the plays, he's doing the cultural meaning making. But, you know, so he's doing all that, and he's doing it through the lens of, by the way, if you want to read a nice little piece from somebody who was not Baraka, one of his close comrades and brothers, my man, Michael Samanga. There's an excellent little book called Amiri Baraka and the Congress of African People, where you can see that political action taking place. Amiri Baraka and the Congress of African People. Y'all heard me mention this many times before, but I'm putting it up here and there because there's so many more people now coming into the conversation. And of course, this conversation today began with and is anchored in this appearance of this book that is driving some people in social structure valences. Wow. And it should drive y'all crazy. Anyway, we continue. So Baraka, Coates, cultural meaning makers generally, this pursuit of truth, this standard of excellence, this attempt to engage in a form of honesty, this pursuit, all done in the glare of the self-examined life. Coates is examining himself the whole way through this book and the changes that take place. Baraka did that. Nationalists, Pan-Africanists, revolutionary nationalists, communists, you know, socialists, all these things. And then at the end, pulling the lever for people like a bourgeois Democrat. I understand. We're all in that. It's very important because that can lead you to having an attorney general's office where you can have a black woman saying, okay, y'all ain't gonna do nothing in Oklahoma, you punk ass white supremacists. We'll at least open a federal investigation and put the testimony there because justice has been delayed. But will it be denied? Maybe. But what we're gonna do in our time is what we can, understanding that politics is the art of the possible, and we will do what we can to at least set that record of memory as a link in the chain so that when there does come together a government, if one ever comes, because it's my money is on the United States disintegrating. before that moment comes. And in that disintegration, what will come out of that might be a different kind of society. We'll see whether this framework can withstand the continued perpetual battering by the ultra nationalists, like the two that are going to be in Pennsylvania today, screaming their their anti-black hatred across the airwaves. After all, we are all Haitians, aren't we? In those moments. And now that this orange fool, his brain leaking out of the ear that he claimed he got hit in, is saying that they're releasing prisoners out of the Congo to come in. Congo is a nitroglycerin word. When you use it to talk about all black people, it's really an N word. Congo was one of the favorites in the 1960s, and this old dog is bringing it back. They're not eating the dogs, but if that old dog was on the menu, nah, you wouldn't want that meat, too tough. Plus, it's like jerky, I think, at this point. Probably would be. Who knows? Let's wish him all safety and continue to live, because as you live, you bleed. And as you bleed, they will be called to you. And as John Clark said, sometimes blood calls blood and blood always answers. When a book like this speaks to common humanity, it becomes a threat to those who want separation and difference, because separation and difference is what allows the hierarchy to replicate itself. It's very important. So this critique of society that Baraka engaged in, that the best cultural meaning makers deal in, because when you read Amir Baraka, he's not just writing poetry, he's not just writing, plays, he's not just engaged in social criticism, he's dealing deep historical dives. He connects, for example, in that essay I was reading from a moment ago, Black Reconstruction in America, 1935, to the Negro, which Du Bois published in 1915, around this question of how we should think about Black collectivity. None of that is here, because it's a different kind of writer. And I would argue that those who write like that don't have the platforms. They're the people who we know, who we be in conversation with, but they're not going to give a platform to somebody like that, because it's much harder to evade or to get around, or that's the wrong thing. Let me say what I mean. What I'm saying is, it's much easier for people who are operating in the realm of building understanding in order to obscure the continuing power hierarchy. So they go into the pantomime, pretending building understanding, because after all, Jon Stewart is not giving up his seat on Comedy Central to anyone. It should have been Roy Wood, but hey, we don't own Comedy Central. This is the point. It's easier to be in those dialogues, expressing sympathy and, doing some good in terms of raising awareness, than it would be to sit across from somebody who knows the social structures cold, who knows the history cold, who can still key with you and then slip in a line that has you realizing, I don't know as much as I think I know. And now the viewers all know what anybody who's really paying attention, who knows, no, Jon Stewart ain't nearly as smart as he plays on TV. It's a different conversation we have to have. That's a governance conversation. So as Ta-Nehisi has been engaged by these spaces, these white spaces, on the question of this book, it ain't on chapter 1. In other words, it's not on the chapter. He starts with an epigraph from James Baldwin, Journalism is Not a Luxury. It's not on chapter 2 on pharaohs. It's not on chapter 3. Which is, that's the South Carolina chapter. Bearing the Flaming Cross. It's been almost exclusively rhetorical gestures to the difference otherwise notwithstanding. It's almost all been on the chapter on Israel and Palestine, the gigantic dream, because that's what's important to a social structure. Should be important to all of us, but for different reasons. You understand? So it's interesting, though. I'm going to read now, and this will be where we spend the rest of our time together today, from the book. From the book, let's go with some opening notes. Ta-Nehisi Coates is showing off his enthusiasm, his self-assuredness, which takes the form of moral conviction. So there's an enthusiasm. I love to write. I live to write. I get up to write. The only thing I like better than teaching is writing, all that. And then there's a moral conviction. There is a very much a black-white world for Ta-Nehisi. His writer is wrong, as he told the guy on CBS. I'm against the death penalty. I don't care what they did. So nickel bag of weed or mass murder. I don't believe in the death penalty. It's a moral thing. So you go to Palestine and say killing is wrong. Killing everybody is wrong. Killing anybody you call Israeli is wrong. Killing Jews is wrong. Killing Arabs is wrong. Killing Muslims is wrong. Killing Palestinians, it's all wrong. Well, that is not how people view the world in real politics. The political leaders like killing some people is good. For Bibi Netanyahu, killing all the Palestinians is fine. For his insane war cabinet, and for those settlers, they want everybody dead. What they hate is when you say what they said, when you repeat it back to them. Ask Mehdi Hassan. Mehdi Hassan been freed. Mehdi Hassan got a version of Narrative in Nubia. Mehdi Hassan got her own platform. Mehdi Hassan's like, nah. And Mehdi Hassan want all the smoke. Not all the smoke in terms of a softball interview between the Vice President of the United States and two former basketball players, but all the smoke in terms of having people who agree with you and people who absolutely disagree with you. Zionist nationalists sit across from you on a stage and y'all have a debate in front of everybody. But to do that, you got to have chops, friends. You can't fake that. This isn't about key hot take lines. You see, this is about deep study. I read what you wrote. I heard what you said, and I'm going to turn it against you. In fact, I'm going to lead you down by having you articulate your position, keep asking you questions, and then say, so you're for mass murder. How dare you say that? That's what you said. You can't hide from deep study. That's a skill. Oh, Baraka was excellent at it. But, this question, Coates shows his enthusiasm. He shows his skill. He shows his self-assuredness, that moral anchor, and he shows also restraint. Coolness, as the Yoruba would say, itutu, coolness. He cool. He gonna smile. He gonna be in an interview smiling, even when the white boy was coming for him. No. This is very important. Let me make this point. That's important to have that balance. It makes it difficult to dismiss somebody like that because I'm not gonna show you that side. I would kiki too, but I'd be clowning Negroes at some point. And everyone, you want to fight? You want to get up? You feel a little husky? Hey man, watch your mic. They coming. You coming? See, I might do that, and at that point, there's a scuffle, and maybe it never airs, because obviously you got to protect, thing. But Coates also captured lightning in a bottle. He writes about that too. The summer of 2020, right? Which it's convergence and flashpoint of state violence. Before 10 years ago was Mike Brown. Leslie McSpadden, Michael Brown Sr., Trayvon Martin. Before that, 2012. Sabrina Fulton, Tracy Martin. You got Sandra Bland. But in 2020 was George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and the spectacle of Black death and the performance of Black resistance. There was some true Black resistance. Then there was performative Black resistance. Then a social structure said, let us accommodate some of this stuff. Robin DiAngelo showed a dookie ton of books. Ibram Kendi. People said, let me order Between the World and Me. I want 500 copies. Have you read it yet? No, I'm just going to order 500 copies, but it'll keep the Black bookstore in business. I'll give a few away. Some of them books in landfill right now, but they did keep bookstores afloat. During the deep COVID, Sankofa is there in part because we helped Sankofa through that period, even though they continue with, as all of our Black bookstores, to kind of make it month to month. Because 2020 was a reckoning summer. There was a look for safety valves. The 1619 project had come out the year before. And so now they got a target. Remember in a session of in class, we looked at the 1776 project, which was Trump and them trying to respond. But, in Ta-Nehisi writes about that. And, you got to then make a calculated decision. Okay, there's a space. Now the truth telling coming hot and heavy. They pulling down statues. They going on this kind of thing. And as Sterling Brown told James Baldwin, yeah, I'd call you a revolutionary if you weren't so conservative. A lot of people made a lot of money that summer. Speaking at Google and going to the place, getting exorbitant speaking fees and talking to, all the different corporations. What can we do? DEIU, most of that stuff's been dismantled now because, wait, they ain't going to kill us all? Okay, wait a minute. That ain't my 15-year-old white daughter out there with a sign saying Black Lives Matter? No, we back. Okay, good. Okay, we got past the election, right? Okay, very good. Okay, let's just, 2021, 2022, 2023. Now you can have the WNBA finals and have the playoffs without the sisters from the Minnesota Lynx got them shirts on, right? Because of Alton Sterling. Oh no, Philando Castile in St. Paul. Now you ain't got to worry about it. But the gut punch to this book is chapter 4 is the one that the social structure wants to talk about. But the first 3 chapters is what we should be focusing on deeply because the place of focus reveals the relationship between who we are to each other, who we are to other people, between the governance and the social structures. Part 4 focused on who we are to each other in terms of what Ta-Nehisi was talking about as oppressed people. But he has been under sustained assault over this last few days because of a social structure that is worried about something being revealed about it that we all know but rarely talk about in mixed company, which is the illegitimacy of that structure that we labor under and against. So the first chapter Journalism is not a luxury. The finally completed essay that he promised those students in the fall of 2022 at Howard University. He talks about words and stories, narratives, and the crafts of language. So guess what? If you got a narrative that doesn't have any memory, then you can have Liz Cheney standing behind Kamala Harris and start cheering without looking at her voting record. Don't even know the voting record. What is the power of language? Ta-Nehisi Coates says, the power of my writing in part, the power of writing in part is to haunt you. He says that in the first part to those students. It ain't to get you to believe my point of view. It's to give you an indelible thing. He's writing about how he was a child. He was reading about Daryl Stingley and how Jack Tatum paralyzed him in a hit. And he went to his daddy like, oh, man, I want to stand Daryl Stingley. So what does Paul do? Pointing to the back room where the book is. They Called Me Assassin by Jack Tatum, who talks about his career. He said, I read the book. It was about his career. It wasn't about that. I didn't give any insight. He said, if only I could interview him. He grew up to be a guy who could have interviewed him on this. You understand? The visceral reaction to Coates in Palestine is because he has touched the most feared chord, connection, human connection. And when you make that human connection with the craft of language, oh, this is a problem, because now you're haunting people. It's hard to look away when you've connected people. People reading the newspapers, here's Saturday's paper, U.S. presence, New York Times, U.S. presence in Middle East. You see it there? U.S. President Middle East spurs debate at Pentagon. Spurs a debate. They know you are deploying them people over there, and it's emboldening them killers. Secret Service stretched thin as agents burn out. Why? You know how many Secret Service agents they're going to have to send to Butler, Pennsylvania today, 5 days after being shot by a would-be assassin in Butler, Pennsylvania? Former President Donald J. Trump stood on stage at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, surrounded by images of his blood-streaked face. Will tell you exactly what happened, and you'll never hear it from me a second time because it's actually too painful to tell. And then he spent the next 12 weeks talking about it. Now he's going to be back at the scene with the board today, and the Secret Service is like, what the hell? Now, you know what? The question I've been asking for months now, actually longer than months, actually since the inauguration of Joe Biden, has finally been answered in print in today's New York Times by Robert Draper. Where is Dr. Donald Harris? Long story in today's paper. Harris distant from a father much like her. Okay, that signals to me that they're not going to be able to use Donald Harris as an October surprise. Long story. Here it is. Finally. You know, Donald Harris lives here in D.C. with his second wife, still consulting with governments after he helped set up Jamaica's economic policy. And some of his friends are saying that in their dream world, in fact, I'll read the last paragraph. One of his friends said he imagines, he says, still his friends say there is more that unites father and daughter than separates them. Mr. Hutchinson said he entertained fantasies about his friend and the Democratic presidential nominee conducting a town hall style meeting together on how to promote an economy that benefits disadvantaged communities, which Donald Harris is utterly equipped to do. He helped write the economic policy for a whole damn country. He imagined such an event in Baltimore, where Ms. Harris headquartered her 2019 campaign and where Dr. Harris currently does some consulting work. That's the healer to me, Mr. Hutchinson said, and I know he'd be open to it. So they're not going to be able to use. Remember Hakeem Jeffries first got elevated to minority leader with the ideas one day he'd be Speaker of the House. I'm saying, at what point they're going to try to hang our friend and brother Leonard Jeffries around his neck? And then the New York Times did a long article on how Hakeem Jeffries has matured, because when he was younger, his uncle was up here with this anti-Semitic stuff, but now he is. I said, okay, that's the seal of approval. Then now I see Donald Harris. That's the seal of approval. She's passed it, friends. She's passed it. And in today's Financial Times, this is a fascinating article. It's I won't show you the whole article. I'll show you the front page. It says Harris's team drive to woo business chiefs succeeds. Though some of America's bosses still lean toward Donald Trump and his plans for deep tax cut, Wall Street is starting to warm, like some of them weren't already warm. Wall Street starting to warm to Kamala Harris after weeks of behind-the-scenes talks between donors and her presidential campaign. Shout out to her brother-in-law. The Harris team's efforts to burnish her pro-business credentials come as the vice president attempts to sustain a fundraising lead over Trump, who has sought to depict her as a radical threat to U.S. capitalism. Check your voter registration, check your voter registration, check your voter registration, early vote, thank the vote, thank the vote. Try to make November the 5th irrelevant, because as we are now seeing in the papers of record for empire, global and domestic, we are now in the end game. To quote Stephen Strange in Avengers Endgame, we're in the end game now. Now the signals are being sent to the people who try to shape policy in terms of narrative, which is why Ta-Nehisi is playing at the valence of narrative, shaping stories. As he says in this book, stories shape everything else. These people in the media are now saying, she's okay, she's not going to take all your money, she's not a communist, and her daddy is not a radical, wild-eyed so-and-so. They actually do talk every once in a while, but they're strange and it's cool. And maybe one day they'll even talk on the stage somewhere about how to do economic policy. In other words, they ain't going to hang it on her. Very interesting to see these developments today. All right, so the visceral reaction to Coates in Palestine is about this touching the most feared chord, common connection. There's a new book out called Carr. Very interesting. Carr, the highest stage of capitalism. This is Primula Nadasen's book, Carr, the highest stage of capitalism. In this book, what Professor Nadasen is writing about is how the idea that it is the care economy, the people who are in here right now who got to go to work at an old folks place or assisted living facility, or who are nurses, who are medical professionals, who are babysitting somebody else's children while they off on Wall Street, who we see littering the streets of the United States of America, who have children of their own. All those people are part of a care economy where they are not well compensated, where they are pressed down, and they call it the highest stage of capitalism in here. Professor Nadasen, who's at Barnard College, Columbia, talking about the fact that you don't express solidarity with those people by saying, oh man, we feel bad, you got to do something. No, you got to go join a picket line. Interesting how, shout out to Pete Buttigieg, how they stopped the longshore people strike, at least postponed it. Got the pay raise up. Now, this isn't all of labor, but Kamala Harris had to come out and endorse the strike because she's standing with labor. That's her political bailiwick. Donald Trump today will lie about it, him and Elon Musk, because they understand their only hope now for this election is to discard any references to anything even closely remotely resembling truth, and go straight with the white racist Klan apartheid lie. They are now unshackled. They've never been shackled, but they ain't no shackle nowhere near the vicinity at this point. Let's just go straight with it. He was down in North Carolina the other day. That shit he was spewing was they lost $1 billion and you didn't get any relief in North Carolina because they gave it to immigrants. I mean, now you don't even argue with a cat like this. You roll over him like the sea. You can't argue with that, because what Donald Trump understands that too many people in this country don't is that works. Do you understand what Ta-Nehisi is writing about here when he talks about niggerology? The whole idea of Josiah Nottingham, it doesn't, no, it's not true. I know it's not true. As you said, Prof, on the radio, not, and that damn J. Marion Sims down there in Alabama, the so-called father of gynecology, that during the reckoning, y'all were able to get that statue of his ass out of New York, at least on public display, experimenting on black women with no anesthesia, not slaves, captives of human traffickers, not slave masters or owners, funky ass captors. The whole idea of justice delayed is justice denied applies to women who were literally tortured to death. And now we got birth control medicine. Now we got all kind of medical techniques born from the torture of black women in captivity, and not with his phrenology and skulls with BBs in them to see how much the brain weighs, with Marion Sims that you mentioned, so-called father of gynecology. All of that justice delayed is justice denied now, when these people, if you read Project 2025, I mean read it and not just talk about it. I have my copy and I took it in my bag because I took it somewhere to read. But when you read in here, this section on the damn registry, you heard Tim Walz talk about it Tuesday. The registry. What's the registry? Junior Varsity Vance with his little eyeliner on, lying through his ass the whole time. And this man said, Y'all want a registry in this book. What does that mean? You get pregnant, you got to report it. Why? Because if you try to terminate that pregnancy, we putting you in jail and whoever's driving the car to get you there. The Lincoln Project did a commercial and somebody will drop it in both chats at some point. The whole idea, you get stopped, you going to jail. I mean, this is where we are now. And so this idea, this visceral reaction that is being had to Coates is a visceral reaction to those who want oppression to drive the narrative and don't want stories that will imagine something different. The circle of self-care has to be expanded to include those whose labor provides the care, because care has become in many ways the highest stage of capitalism. This is what Ta-Nehisi writes on page 15. He says, it was clear to me. This is in chapter 1. He says, it was clear to me, it was clear that such power must serve something beyond my amusement, the power to command words and language. He says that it should do the work of illuminating, of comforting and undoing the violence I saw around me, that beauty must be joined to politics, that style possessed must meet struggle, that style possessed must meet struggle demanded. Okay, that's very important. Now he's in Senegal in this next chapter, in the next page or two, and I'm saying, man, you were in Senegal. You didn't say a word about Ayikwe Arma. If you're going to see Arma in Popengine, y'all could have had a hell of a conversation about style. This is not a criticism, it's an observation. And it is my responsibility to the genealogy I come from, which is in many ways the same genealogy that Ta-Nehisi comes from, particularly through his father. All of those people who his father was close to, John Henry Clark and Joseph Ben Yakin and then Sharcy McIntyre and Pat, don't do that. I'm thinking about all these people and now start naming names. But my point is this, that genealogy, oh man, that genealogy is my genealogy. And he's true to it and I'm true to it in different ways, different choices, but all part of the same effort. And so when he says it was clear to me that such power must serve something beyond my amusement, there are some people who just do it for their amusement and they'll claim that that's progress. No, individuals don't beat institutions. Ayikwe Arma talks about the use of style too. He says, choose only the best words, charge only the best ideas to continue to hand down in the genealogy. When we make mistakes, preserve those mistakes as lessons to be learned. But in terms of our standards, have the standards come from our style. It's very important. So in the chapter on pharaohs, I was going a little slower. I'm going to speed up now because, you know, I'm looking now. We're going to get toward the 2-hour mark and I don't want to mess that up. On pharaohs, that chapter, very interesting. In September 2022, he goes to Senegal. It's the same semester he's teaching that class. He talks about myth making, theirs and ours. He talks about Josiah Nat. He talks about how his parents named him. He talks about Ta-Nehisi, black land, as he translates it, Nehesi. Egyptology says born in 1799. Well, yeah, in terms of a social structure, granted, but don't confuse that with the impact and immersion in Kemet, because we were talking about Kemet long before that. And there are not very many mentions of that genealogy in this chapter, of those who were fighting the battle, who St. Clair Drake would call, and Anderson Thompson, the old scrappers. And it's interesting because when you read enough, when you know the sources, you know where Ta-Nehisi is drawing this from. When he name checks St. Clair Drake, that's black folk then here and there. That's black. That's the 2-volume work where St. Clair Drake in part 2 of the book, the 2nd volume rather, talks about that genealogy of black scholars, many of them autodidacts, self-trained, who defended ancient Egypt, who defended classical Africa. But Drake, an anthropologist trained himself, does a remarkable job. And here I would, St. Clair Drake's been an ancestor since 1987, but my friend and colleague and comrade and elder, the great Joyce King, was one of his students, also a student of Sylvia Winter. And it would be very interesting to hear Joyce King, Dr. King, weigh in on how Ta-Nehisi constructs what St. Clair Drake called the vindicationist line, because he used that line over and over again. These are the black scholars who Ta-Nehisi narrates as vindicating ancient Egypt, vindicating African history. That's because St. Clair Drake said that. And I don't call them vindicationists, even though I recognize the impulse behind it. They're not trying to prove their humanity to white people. They're trying to recover the momentum of memory. These are two different things. And if you take the vindicationists as an argument with white people, you will go too far. Now, he doesn't do that exclusively, but it becomes problematic, as we'll see in a minute. He says that this, you know, the one person he does mention is James Theodore Holly, J.T. Holly, who's very important. In fact, I wrote about J.T. Holly in my dissertation. In fact, my dissertation was on this, African philosophy of history from ancient times to the contemporary era and then to now. And I'm tracing that genealogy of thinkers of African people on African memory. And of course, I don't start with the Holocaust of African enslavement and captivity. Of course, I don't start with the trauma of human trafficking. You can't. If it's going to be truly in our genealogy, you start African memory where African memory starts. Did not our ancestors have ancestors? If you start that memory with the trauma, then you lift up as acts of resistance that should be the grounding acts of how we see ourselves, things like a 1619 project, things like starting with slavery. And now you got a problem, because when you go to Senegal, you didn't, okay, let me go talk to Ikwe Ama, who would never start that. Let me talk to these contemporary folks who are brilliant, who are working, who are fighting, and then I'm going to think about skin color. Y'all say I'm mixed? Whoa! Can we go back to shake out the joke? Because at the end of this chapter, the young, in fact, I don't want to misquote the brother, so let me just go straight here. He says this, he says, I know what I said about clarity without mapping the shape and content of words to feeling, but I confess that I have not yet found the words to capture the linkage. By that linkage, he means the linkage to Africa. Halfway through our meeting, a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, joined the party, because he's now meeting with some African writers and others they arranged for him, because he said, I've been here for these days and I'm going around and I ain't really sat with the people. Let me go sit with the people, because, you know, Ta-Nehisi is trying to process this. Anybody who's ever traveled to a space like this, y'all know the value of just, let me just be quiet and take it in. My first time to Africa, 95, 05, 15, 25, almost 30 years ago, I was fortunate. We went to Ghana, West Africa, and then went to Kemet, East Africa, same group. So we with Jacob Carruthers and Zinga Haru and all them for the ASCAT conference, our international conference. So I got to go both places. I wish Ta-Nehisi had gone to Kemet. In fact, come on with us next August, brother. I may have to stay 2 weeks, but you come with us. I think you'll write a very different story, because you'll realize, as he says here, which kind of, you know, made me wince. He says, he reveals his name origin on page 34. Then I'll come back to the end. This is what he says as we talk. He says, the truth is, well, he says, that was how I got my African name, Ta-Nehisi, a designation in ancient Egyptian for the kingdom of Nubia, sometimes translated as land of the blacks. That's about as accurate. That's pretty good, because he says sometimes, right? Not most of the time. Anyway, I was born into what the historian St. Clair Drake calls the vindicationist tradition. That is, to black people who sought to reclaim the very history weaponized against them and turn it back against their tormentors. If a black Egypt was what niggerologists feared, then we would insist on its truth and take it to its logical conclusion. We were born not to be slaves, but to be royalty. We were not born to be royalty, brother. I understand it, calling everybody queen and king. I understand peace, king. I get it, but no. That, you know what that leads to? That leads to somebody like Kendrick saying nigga means niggas, king of kings. No, we wouldn't have been sitting in the palace, brother. We'd have been working on them damn stones. This is what Ikwe Ama says. Do not glorify ancient Egypt. We study Egypt for the lessons it can tell us about human management and government, for the governance, for the deeper ways of knowing, but we don't make it into a place where they're not human. And this is the thing that sticks in my craw. People who know better do this. You set up a lie about how we think about Kemet, and then you use that lie to argue against why we shouldn't study classical Africa. And then got the nerve to walk around in a hot-ass monastic robe in May to go get graduation with some damn European monastic robes on. Don't you understand the power of myth-making? You ain't got no smoke for King Arthur. You'll make yet another movie about Elizabeth. You'll even stick a person with one line of African descent, which would make her African, at least a gloss of it, in a thing like Bridgerton, and celebrate. What the hell when it comes to Egypt? Thank God Michael Joseph Jackson and John had enough sense to make a damn video. Remember the time. I prefer Magic Johnson as a pharaoh to that stuff they do now with Gerhard, whatever his name is. Anyway, point is this. We continue. John Singleton. We continue. If a black Egypt is what niggerologists feared, then we would insist on its truth and take it to its logical conclusion. We were born not to be slaves, but to be royalty. That explains our veneration of black pharaohs and African kingdoms. It absolutely does not. It absolutely does not. It's so much more complicated than that, but you get a pass because I understand you were making a larger point. The point, he says, was to tell a different story than the one imposed on us. Facts. An understandable response, but here it is, but one I've never made peace with. Here's a tip. I think you would make a lot more peace with it the more you knew about it. And I'm not saying you don't know about it. You know a great deal more than most people, but there's still work to do. And this is the work. He continues, he says, the truth is, I never felt fitted to my name. Its length and complexity draw attention and counter my desire to live quietly in the cut. Understood. It isn't pronounced as it's written. Even if it were pronounced in another way as it was written, would it make you any more comfortable? It's still TA with a dash and then Nehisi. If you got the A in there, which you could put in there as a vowel substitution, Nehisi, would it make you any more comfortable? It's still Ta-Nehisi. He says, the awkwardness was part of the point. My parents meant to mark me as a citizen of a country far different from the one in which I live. Right. But then he goes on at the end. He says this. As I said, he's in there at the end. He says, halfway through our meeting, a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, joined the party. I was sitting in a circle fielding questions. She looked at the edge of the circle with a look of amazement on her face. She took a seat next to me. I answered a few more questions from the group, and then she raised her hand and asked her own. She introduced herself as Bigwe Ka and told me she was a grad student at Sheikh Anta Diop University, working on a dissertation about my books. I'm sure she asked a question, but I don't remember it. I'm sure she asked a question, but I don't remember it. Now the amazement was my own. There I was on the other side, among family, divided from each other by centuries. I'd come back, but my own writing had gotten there first. It's an indulgence. I get it. It should have been a beautiful thing, a shocking thing, a wonderful thing. She asked the question, but I don't remember it. She goes to Sheikh Anta Diop University. Mario was just there last December. You work at Howard University. You know Mario. It's been an interesting conversation. I'm going to, I dropped the link in the chat when Mario was talking about Between the World and Me and linking it to Kemet. Mario would have given you at least a half dozen names of people on the faculty at Sheikh Anta Diop and some students. And in that almost moment, when you had those young people around you in a circle, somebody could have been in that space, and it might have been that sister, because I'd have loved to know the question she asked that you can't remember, that would have opened the door for you that you could have never walked back through. And this could have been a very different book, because what you were looking for that you're not quite comfortable with, the people who teach Egyptian language at Sheikh Anta Diop University could have helped you with. But that's not even the point I want to make deeply. He was in Senegal. The man for whom they link him to, because Toni Morrison did, James Baldwin, was in Paris in 1956. Why is that important? That's important because in 1956, James Arthur Baldwin attended the Conference of Negro Writers, and he sat in a lecture by Sheikh Anta Diop. And he said, I listened to Sheikh Anta Diop give a talk, and that talk was about the connections of Africa culturally, and how this cultural connection is so important to us, and how this connection, this cultural connection, allows us to he says, what does he say? Sheikh Anta Diop's lecture was called Africa's Contributions and Cultural Perspectives. James Baldwin is sitting there in 1956. And he says, I wasn't sufficiently interested in Diop's thesis to think about it. I'm sure she asked the question, but I don't remember it. Go back 1956, James Baldwin, listening to the man himself who's making this connection. They could have been made in Senegal with a student from Sheikh Anta Diop University, certainly the university he went to. Baldwin, 2 generations before, listening to the man himself, Egyptologist, chemist, physicist, everything from the melanin dosage tester with Theophilo Benga, who still walks the earth, retranslated all that stuff and puts it right there. This is not romanticizing. James Baldwin sitting there, obsessed with race, brilliant, but so trapped in the race lens that his brilliance is emptied into a paper bag with a hole in it. I'm not interested in this. Sheikh Anta Diop says in the lecture, the purpose of this work is not to romanticize Egypt, but to orient the peoples of Africa toward a shared future. A shared future. He goes on to say in this lecture that he gave that James Baldwin was not animated by, Diop says, quote, as you recall, my purpose was to put forth perspectives for the future by studying the past, so that I had to recommend valuable and potentially acceptable solutions on the level of history, on the level of language, on the level of culture in general, and on the level of technical organization. And the heterogeneous character of my presentation followed from this. an industrial presentation, because he was going on to talk about the cultural unity of Africa as the basis for a federated African state. Guess who will be included in that? The Africans of the diaspora. We will never achieve liberation. We will never achieve repair. We will always have justice denied as long as the delay is a historical delay that has inserted somebody else's fake memories into our attempts to generate narratives, particularly when we ground it in history. And this is a missed opportunity, it seems to me, in this chapter. It is one that he says, I was home in Senegal and the ghosts came back with me. He says it on page 39. I was fortunate to have gone to Kemet and Ghana. So the cultural unity I've been studying for years became even more real to me. I could see it. I see my work. I live through the lens of cultural continuities and cultural community. I see Africa wherever I go. Because I ain't no African. The fact that you said ain't no is part of the speech pattern that shows you that you are. But it's okay, because I know, which means we can talk, which means you already know. You just don't know you know. And let's build that. The more memory you have, the more you can build the momentum of memory, and it becomes possible to think politically after you have conceived it differently. This is what a message like this got some people animated about in the last chapter, because they're worried about unity and human sympathy for and continuity and comradeship with the Palestinians. But ultimately, the first chapters are where Ta-Nehisi is grounding this in a community of African people. And most people who are obsessed with the slaughter, which we should be, quite frankly, to stop it, going to miss the point that the thing that's carrying him through this is the Africanness. So Coates says on page 44, I felt that I had somehow beaten history itself. What took you so long? By coming to Senegal, I felt like I had beat history itself. And you did, but he says, what took you so long? He said, I don't have a good answer to that. That's how we feel in that narrative return. I stood there in Elmina and Cape Coast in Ghana and felt that same thing. I know that my ancestors probably didn't come out of this particular port, but they came out of a port. Justice delayed. Must it be justice denied? Amnesia becomes justice delayed. Culturally connected, but with no long memory. Think about Fatima, who is called by a social structure, which means now we put that name in our mouth because she was on a boat named Phyllis and bought by John Wheatley and his family, Phyllis Wheatley. When you read her poetry through the conceptual categories of who Africans are to each other, you see a very different read on her poetry. Phyllis Wheatley was the argument with the Book of Negroes that caused me to think, okay, we got to separate social structure from governance, because Phyllis Wheatley is called the first Black poet in the Americas. That's bullshit. We know it is. Were there no poets before she learned some English to go with the Latin and the Greek? Of course there were. Were there no poets in Wolof or Arabic? Of course there were, and she was one of them. So that allows us to do that, but we have to ask ourselves, that justice denied doesn't become, justice delayed doesn't become justice denied. How do we recover? How do we even think about it? Well, because we have to be animated, as Ta-Nehisi is in this book, by the centrality of the desire and with the spirit of generosity. They can have you sit across from a Jon Stewart and smile, sit across from a dude on CBS Morning and smile, and still deliver the gut punch. That is the key challenge. As James Baldwin, to redeem James Baldwin in some ways, because what he did there with Shekinah Joke was completely erroneous. And that's okay. He's still brilliant. But James Baldwin wrote one time, he said, love helps you recognize what you don't remember. Baldwin said, my memory stammers, but my soul is a witness. That generosity can help us recover our memory. That's the key challenge. After so long, justice delayed, we decide this is too hard. I got to learn hieroglyphs, as Conrad World said. I got to learn how to draw these birds. Yeah, you can do it. I can't do it. You went to school and learned algebra. You went to school and figured out how to graduate, taking classes. Can't you learn some of this language? At Ta-Nehisi, he's learning French. He's trying to have the conversations in French. He's learning language. He said, I got to have my own learning style in that, because the ways that I was taught in school weren't ones that really hit me the same way. Understood. Repetition. That's how Mario Beatty teaches meta nature. So we got to, justice delayed becomes justice denied when we decide this is too hard. The investment in time and space is too much. So we abandon recovery. There's the justice denied. The key, however, is genealogy. We have to regain the momentum of memory, not by reliving it and reimagining it with every generation. So we got to make up something new every time we come, but by narrative, by long view memory, sit atop the momentum of your ancestors. Ta-Nehisi is writing about that on page 46. He says, for Africa is not just the geographical origin of our ideal. It is the anchor of the idea. It is the warrant that justified the ordeal. So our open enemies use Africa, use Congo, use niggerology, use hood, use ratchet, use all of those terms as warrants for the way that we can be treated, because it's not human. Oh, girlfriend, okay, you're mocking me. That's the N word. You're coming in with that fake smile on your face. So tell us again about how you behave to do your students. Your students got the gloss or the N word. It's the warrant. And then the minute you say Africa, shoo, that's a word. How you turn hotel, a word that means peace, into a warrant, into something to clown people over. Deep inside, Ta-Nehisi writes, we know beyond the skin color, but we get the thing. Black is beautiful. But see, we see it from the outside. Only when we meditate, only when we deeply investigate within, does it emerge from within. Physical beauty is fine. Ta-Nehisi says it's a problem. He quotes Toni Morrison on that. I'm not for that. I say that the way one looks is how we came out our mother's womb. The way one behaves, Iwa in Yoruba, character, the way one behaves is the source for love, or mer, as they would say in ancient Egypt. The way one behaves. When people say, oh, she looks so pretty, but she acts so ugly. He looks so handsome, but he acts so ugly. They're making a distinction that is Africana between how someone appears and who they really are. And that beauty is the internal beauty. It's evaded here because the language hadn't formed yet, but I'm hoping and expecting that as Ta-Nehisi continues to work, we will see it emerge. Race, not physical appearance, is the villain of the piece. The door of no return being a metaphor, we understand that. And then he says, Paul is reading some things. He comes back to Ta-Nehisi after reading a particular book and see how black people turn on each other at one point in Africa. And Paul says on page 56 and 57, he says, I don't think we're ever going to get back to Africa. I've heard Paul say things like that many times. And I said many times that thing to Paul and everybody else here, like the American Negro was finished. I believe that with my whole heart. The American Negro was finished. That Negro is done. But why you want to hold on to the American Negro anyway? We African people. We should be able to come up with something different. Clinging to the American Negro, particularly as it expresses itself in blackface nativism, becomes justice delayed. And if you keep doing that long enough, you'll wrap yourself in an American flag and start stuttering when they start talking about the crimes of this government against human beings around the world, as Ta-Nehisi Coates did in this book. And at that point, oh, we got a problem. You know what's interesting, Prof, in that first chapter, and I'm going to go back to it now, but to say as Ta-Nehisi's reading and writing, and then he's writing, and then you see him quote that long block quote from Frederick Douglass, and you see how the language changed. It made me long for that 19th century. I love that 19th century language. Why? Because when you read that 19th century language, the command of language was different. There's no social media. There's no cartoons. There's no, you got to say this, you got to paint that picture with the words. And when we read Martin Delaney's Blake, for example, that's 19th century language. And you can see the change in language. Ain't nobody imagine themselves as a pharaoh. We are held outside the West and kept close enough to it to be enchanted by it with its promise. That's what he's writing about on page 59. We might have to pick this up next week. He says, we are black people here and there, victims of the West, a people held just outside its liberal declarations, but kept close enough to be enchanted with its promises. We know the beauty of this house, its limestone steps, its wainscoting, its marble baths, but more, we know that the house is haunted, that there's blood in these bricks and the ghosts in the attic. Who is the we? Yeah, nice stuff. But then you think black people ain't had nice stuff. And you start comparing the black stuff with the white stuff to prove that black people had nice stuff. The trick bag, justice delayed. I'm going to bring this to a close in a second because I think rather than go into the South Carolina chapter bearing the flaming cross, I'm going to tie this off with this chapter. And then next week, we're going to pick up in chapter 4, which is the second major movement, bearing the flaming cross, because that's where he talks about his learning styles. The key phrase here is adaptation, the key word. He talks about his mother and his teachers, well, at least his mother, helping him adapt to learn because his learning style was difficult in school in terms of writing and reading, and strictly writing. And so he says now, talking to his adult friends, he may have had ADHD or something like that, and that he never wanted to be a banking teacher. He quotes Paulo Freire, and he lists the names of one of the great master teachers of our generation, of our age. He's not of our generation, like not mine. My friend and colleague, Dr. Angela Carter's advisor, he was on her dissertation committee as well, Jules Harrell, Baba Jules. Baba Jules is who he's talking about in that chapter in South Carolina, who had Ta-Nehisi at the behest of his mother and father go through the rites of passage with Nation House. That's Baba Ajay Akoto. So you see that. And of course, there's another name, Barathunde Thurston, but we'll talk about him in that context because Ta-Nehisi, Barathunde Thurston, Kamal Bell, they all come from parents who were deep in the African-centered movement. They weren't vindicationists. But if you want to know where those names come from, it comes from a generation that had a different vision of where we were going. And so I think we're going to pause there, because then that'll give us time. Next week we'll get into the chapter on South Carolina, and then we'll get into the chapter everybody arguing about, because we've done enough about it today to get people in, and to give people another week to get the book from a Black-owned bookstore. So we should.
I dropped in the YouTube chat. If you want to come to Knarrative, this is a good reason. We have 300 Black-owned bookstores in a registry, so you can get your book from one of them, and they're done geographically, so you can go into the resources section and pick your state and buy your book directly from there. And learn Meta Nature as well. All of the lessons have been banked in Knarrative. You can go start with lesson 1. It is a spiritual experience. Anyone that understands why cursive writing was important and why it has done something, I think, to this next generation who can't read or write it. There's something in writing paper, pen to paper, but the glyphs are even more powerful because that's ancient. That's the beginning. Okay, so Dr. Mario Beatty, the best Meta Nature teacher in the world. Or none. And lastly, sir, the book came out October 1st. Did you get an advance copy?
No, ma'am.
Okay,
in fact, it's funny.
Wait, hold on. I'm on chapter 2, and you don't finish the book. Okay, so
I read twice. No, because I don't sleep.
When does this happen?
That's my job. That's my job. Look, we're born, we die. In between, look, and you know what? I want y'all to know, everybody in here except Karen Hunters, you should close your ears to hear this. She worked every day. Tomorrow she'll be working. She doesn't take a day off. So you talking about me? At the end of the day, we all do what we do.
I know we don't have time.
No, we don't. We got to buy our time back. No, seriously, we do. And going into 2025, all things we've been talking about that for 4 years, some of the stuff that come to fruition, the whole arsenal. There's a million other things I would have been able to pull from, but the stuff's in storage. So we got to. I'm committed to getting that together. Writing, you said we're going to do that. Publishing, all of that, we're going to do that as well. And no. This is look. Put it this way: Ta-Nehisi Coates, brother, friend, very important figure, has done another service to us with the message, and to honor him and that genealogy he fully embraces. We have to do what we're trying to do today, and what we do with Knarrative and Nubia. We have to honor that, because otherwise he will have done that, and the only people that'll be after him are the people who claim to be sympathetic, as Martin Luther King would say, who really probably aren't. They just like their position and don't want it toppled. And then the open enemies of all of us, and they're not gonna come for him. That would happen.
No, they're not. All right. So thank you. I need to go for a walk so I can get through chapter 2, and then my book should be here tomorrow. Hopefully,
it'll be there.
So I'm gonna keep reading. But thank you.
I said that's good, because that'll give us time next week. Then we can get, because that South Carolina chapter is very, very interesting, because he walks the state house with that white woman who they wanted her not to teach. And he talks about the statues, and he starts with Ed Dwight, that former astronaut who did that. We talked about this here, the South Carolina rendering. I love that rendering, and I look at it very differently than Ta-Nehisi wrote about it. And I suspect we probably look at it the same, but the way he wrote about it, you might mistake how he narrates that lawn. But we'll get into that next week.
And for people who are used to engaging in discourse as if it's a sporting event, where there are wins and losses and verses and people against each other, this is how we should be examining all text.
Yes.
There's no conflict. It's just understanding and a commitment to broadening our view and perspective. That's it. That's what this work is. So I'm grateful for it. And Dr. Carr, if you could stick around, because I got something to ask you off mic.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Love you. We'll see you office hours on Monday.
Monday night, y'all know we're finishing up the conversation around the article that Dr. Shanice Thompson and the folks at Bowie State University published, the article on Africana Studies. So we'll finish up that conversation, the course design. Shout out to everybody who came in last week, including Kathy, who I think is in Atlanta. UNCF has an intensive workshop this weekend on oral history. Shout out to Kathy, who talked about how to capture family histories. And I told her, Kat, now you coming into here to teach the class in Nubia, so you need to stop playing. So anyway, Monday night at 8. Yes, indeed.
And tomorrow, last Sunday, we had a watch party with Vigilante, the Greg documentary, which was infuriating. Everyone who's like, oh, I don't know if my vote. Okay, keep playing with the rest of our freedoms.
The rest of our freedoms. The rest of our freedoms.
Yeah.
Oh
No,
wait.
it was powerful.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I should mention too. Baba Omo wanted us to mention
Oh, that's
Dan Black.
right. I'm sorry. I
No,
forgot.
no, no. It's
It's the
Wednesday,
ninth.
right?
It's the ninth, right? It's the ninth.
It's
So
the
we
night.
got time.
Night.
Yes. But go ahead, mention it,
No,
please.
so I mean Wednesday the 9th. For those of you who are in North Kakalaki, he's gonna be at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College, North Carolina A&T, McNair Hall. That's Ron McNair, the black astronaut, by the way, because you know A&T is known for their science work. North Carolina A&T campus, McNair Hall, room 240. Given all the people here in both these chats, I suspect that room's not gonna be big enough, but let's test that. He's gonna be there talking about two of his works, Don't Cry for Me, and of course the one that we already knew. He came to discuss The Coming. Wednesday, October 9th at 5 p.m. Public reading and book signing by Daniel Black. I'm tripping. The main one is up there by his picture, black on black. So yeah, black. Okay. So did I get everything, Prof?
You did. That was excellent. I appreciate you. We got all of that. Yeah, Dr. Dr. Daniel Black. So much to do, but I'm
Yeah.
so grateful for you. I'm grateful for the space. I'm grateful for all of the Nubians.
Yes.
This is a special gathering,
Yes.
and I
Oh,
love
and
it.
we didn't ring the bell. We heard about John Amos. We rang the bell, but we should also probably ring it for Dikembe Mutombo.
Yes,
Who built
absolutely,
Built
absolutely.
a somebody put it in the YouTube chat. Somebody, you know, bought a who built a hospital and named it for his mother. Who said that's service, man. You know what I'm saying? It said,
58, younger than both of us. So
both of us.
time
50,
is what it is, and we got to do the most with the time that we have.
no
On this earth,
question.
so
No question. Oh, thank you, Jerome. Jerome says Ta-Nehisi's going to be in Charleston on Wednesday, the 9th at 8 p.m. So after you finish seeing, well, that's South Carolina, Charleston at 8. I don't know if that's at the museum or it would seem like it would be on brand. Wait, Charleston, he probably going to see that teacher. Would. Yeah. Let me see. Can I find right quick while we still live? Charleston, South Carolina. What are we talking about? The 9th of October. October meaning 10. See, I'm sorry. I just get caught. Coates. Let's see what we got there. Oh yeah, new date and conversation with Ta-Nehisi Coates. Presented by Charleston Galliard Center and Buxton Books. Is Buxton one of the black owns? Don't you don't know. Let's see. Galliard Center. I don't know. That's Charleston. It says diversity, so I'm assuming that's not black. I shouldn't do that.
Wait, hold on.
It's
independent. It's an independent bookstore. And on the pages is a bunch of unmelanated people with raisins in their pockets. I'm sure. No,
Lord have mercy.
I'm joking.
No, Jesus. That's all right.
About us. No pictures. There's a tiger. Rawr.
You see that tiger? It looks like a Jackson State tiger. I know it's not though.
No, it's just a tiger somewhere. I'm assuming just because it would have said that it's
independent in downtown Charleston. Yeah, that's high rent district. Oh, although it looks like he's going to be in conversation with Tanya Matthews, who's the president and CEO of the International African American Museum.
And they have a whole the lost stories of Black Charleston. So they're at least listen, because we're not racist, it doesn't, as long as we're centered or we, I'm more happy with the centering of us.
Yeah, it would be nice to go on a black bookstore tour, and maybe that's something he can do after he's finished with the people who are gonna buy 5 copies at $50. You gotta buy a $49 ticket, and that gets you a copy of the book. It says tickets start at $49, so the book is not $49. How much this book? This book $30. Oh my goodness! Oh, I'm looking at the gallery. It's very nice. Oh, it's like an orchestra joint. So you got Orchestra Street. I'm sure okay. See, here's the challenge. And I hope, and knowing Ta-Nehisi, if he thinks about it, he'll say something about it. He's writing a book about access, and then you got this beautiful theater that looks like the Kennedy Center, Eisenhower room. And I'm sure the tickets get higher the closer you get to the stage. So I wonder how the Africans who chop that indigo and rice and sugarcane in South Carolina would feel about that. Oh, anyway, but that's another problem, not our problem, because this independent,
right?
we got,
and we can build the world that we want to live in. So
yes, we can build the world
that's aspirational. Then so let it be. All right.
So let it be.
I love you. Love everybody. And see
See
y'all,
y'all.
some of y'all tomorrow. I
Yes.
think it's Dr. Narissa tomorrow or Dr.
Oh,
Sunyata.
Narissa.
Just,
Oh, is
just
it
tune in.
Senora?
Just tune in. Just tune in
Yeah,
Sundays. Nubian
absolutely.
support.
Noon.
All right.
No question.
All right. Bye-bye, Dr. Carr.
See you all. See you.
All right. Bye.